Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Department of the Interior's virtual forum on federal oil and gas program. My name is Connie Gillette, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Before we begin, I want to let participants know on this call that this forum is being recorded. There will be live captions available throughout the duration of the event. And now it is my great honor to introduce the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, to give opening remarks. Madam Secretary, you may turn your camera on.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this public forum. I know people are tuning in from all over the country, which speaks to the importance of this issue. There is no doubt that oil, gas, and coal energy from our public lands and ocean has helped build our economy and power our nation. Fossil fuels will continue to play a major role in America for years to come. But too often, the extraction of resources has been rushed to meet the false urgency of political timetables, rather than with careful consideration for the impacts of current or future generations. During the past 4 years, the Trump administration offered vast swaths of our public lands and waters for drilling, prioritizing fossil fuel development above all other uses on public lands and waters. The potential impacts to people, water, wildlife, and climate were deliberately ignored, something the courts continue to address. While some corporations profited, taxpayers were shortchanged, and some Americans' voices were not heard. An act now, think later approach to managing our public lands and waters hasn't worked well. Not for the communities who live with the legacies of pollution, not for the coal and oil workers whose jobs and benefits are being cut, not for the local, state, local, and tribal governments who struggle to pay teachers and firefighters when the market drops. Not for the tribal nations who are consulted too little and too late on projects that impact their communities for a very long time. And certainly not for the sustainability of our country and our planet. In order to tackle the climate crisis and strengthen our nation's economy, we must manage our lands and waters and resources, not just across fiscal years, but across generations. Now is the time for all of us to have a frank conversation about the future of our shared resources. I'll not pretend that this moment of reflection will be easy, or that we have all the right answers, but I can promise you that I'll listen to you, I'll be honest and transparent throughout this process. The pause in new oil and gas lease sales gives us space to look at the federal fossil fuel programs that haven't been meaningfully examined or modernized in decades. I want to be clear that the pause on new oil and gas lease sales does not impact permitting and development on valid existing leases. Further, oil and gas companies have amassed thousands of permits to drill on 38 million acres of public lands and oceans, an area larger than the state of Iowa. Today and over the coming weeks and months, we will look forward to hearing from you about our path forward. We're exploring ideas that leaders from both parties have brought forward to rethink how we manage energy and minerals on our public lands. We'll also continue to meet with governors on both sides of the aisle, hearing from Congress, and engaging in consultation with tribal nations. President Biden's agenda demonstrates that America's public lands and oceans can and should be engines for local economies. We recognize that energy companies are innovating to tackle climate change and stay globally competitive. We know how to create more good-paying union jobs through clean energy production. We can put people to work, restoring our lands and waters through a civilian climate corps. And we can ensure that communities have the right tools and resources to support families that have been hurt by the oil and coal busts. My ancestors made subtle but constant changes, century after century, to how they farmed and cared for the land, because they knew it was their obligation to leave a sustainable planet to me and to all of us. We too must take a longer view. Right now, more than ever, we need hopeful, practical, and honest thinking about our public lands and waters. I look forward to working with you including federal, state, local, and tribal leaders to bring a measure of common purpose to how we manage America's public lands and waters and the oil, gas, and minerals they hold for all Americans. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Secretary Haaland. It's terrific to see you in that beautiful office. Appreciate you welcoming us all to the forum today. I know that you've got to leave us to get to another event. You're double booked, but we're so honored you could be here with us at the beginning. Thank you again. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Laura Daniel Davis, and I recognize that I live and work within the ancestral lands of the Anacostans in the Anacostia and Potomac River watersheds. I acknowledge the place-based knowledge of these peoples, and I'm grateful for their ancestral and current stewardship of these lands. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management here at the Department of the Interior. I want to first say thank you to all the experts that are participating today. And thank you also to all those who are watching as we talk about the federal oil and gas program and gain insight to inform our comprehensive review. We're committed to moving forward in a productive and transparent manner with all of our partners. For us at Interior, President Biden's commitment to tackle the climate change threat is the thread that runs through all of our efforts. Like the Secretary said, our principal charge is to manage our lands, waters, and resources, not merely across the fiscal years, but across generations. And I'd add explicitly for the next generations. I know that comment about the fiscal year resonates for those of us who live in fiscal year time in and around Washington. In my role here, I oversee the agency's oil and gas leasing and permitting programs, as many of you are probably aware. We are tasked within the framework of Executive Order 14008 to conduct a comprehensive review of federal oil and gas permitting and leasing practices across public lands and in offshore waters. The executive order directs the Department of the Interior to pause new oil and gas leasing on public lands and offshore waters, as the Secretary mentioned, concurrent with this comprehensive review of the federal oil and gas program. The targeted pause, I want to reiterate, does not impact existing operations or permits for valid existing leases, which are continuing to be reviewed and approved. The order does not restrict energy activities on private or state lands or lands that the United States holds in trust or restricted status for tribes or individual Indians. The federal oil and gas programs account for nearly a quarter of all US greenhouse gas emissions and are thus a major contributor to the climate challenge. Through our review, we're seeking to restore balance on public lands and waters, create jobs, and provide a path that can align the management of America's public lands and waters with our nation's climate, conservation, and clean energy goals. We're facing serious challenges onshore in the form of the contribution of fossil fuel development to climate change, including methane emissions from operations and addressing idled and orphaned wells. In addition, we have royalty rates that have not been increased in more than a century and bonding rates that were set in the middle of the last century. In the offshore program, we also need to ensure that we're driving down emissions, protecting marine life, and that the program serves the interests of taxpayers. We think there are a number of ways that the fossil fuel leasing program can better meet the needs of the American public, which has clear expectations on how we should be managing our shared public lands and waters. Through this review and in how we do our work, we think that we can ensure greater equity, transparency, and public involvement, shore up our environmental review processes, provide a fair return to the American taxpayer, and be sure that we're protecting the special and sacred places that we hear about from so many. These are some of the things that we're looking at in our review. We're very interested in your thoughts on solutions and improvements to the program. While we're undertaking this review, we're welcoming input. We're engaging in extensive public outreach as part of the comprehensive review, and that includes this public forum. We've announced too the opportunity for any interested members of the public or stakeholder communities, and we hope there will be many, to provide written input to the department through April 15th. Feedback from the public is really critical to the success of this review, and we encourage members of the public to submit substantive ideas to address these issues we're going to be discussing at energyreview@ios.doi.gov. I do want to say just one further word about the feedback you may decide to provide. We don't really need volume. We're not looking for volume. We really want your substantive and innovative thinking on the issues we're talking about today and your considered recommendations for us. Additionally, we'll continue to conduct individual and small group meetings, as well as tribal consultation and engagement with governors and members of Congress. This effort will be comprehensive and will be critically important in informing an interim report this summer. I really want to thank everyone again for being with us. And I'm going to ask Nada Culver, the Deputy Director of BLM, to pick up here.
Good morning. I'm Nada Culver, the Deputy Director of Policy and Programs at the Bureau of Land Management. My pronouns are she and her, and I recognize that I live and work within the ancestral lands of the Cheyenne and Ute people. I acknowledge the place-based knowledge of these people, and I'm grateful for their ancestral and current stewardship of these lands. Today, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the Bureau of Land Management's onshore oil and gas leasing program, both the manner in which these lands are leased and developed, and the financial returns that our program yields. I'm going to go through much of this quickly to set the stage for the input from the panelists. And of course, as you've heard, this forum will be available online should you want to watch this PowerPoint again or just spend some time with our beautiful pronghorn antelope here. Also, I am sitting in Colorado, and I know we have panelists and participants from Colorado as well. Many of us here are struggling with the events of the last few days, and I really want to thank you all for spending time with us still here today. Next slide, please. Just to reiterate the context of our forum today, we are operating under Executive Order 14008, issued on January 27th, regarding tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. As Laura mentioned, this executive order directed us to conduct a comprehensive review and reconsideration of the federal oil and gas leasing and permitting practices, to look at the potential climate and impacts from these programs, and also specifically to look at potential adjustments of the royalty rates to ensure a fair return to taxpayers. And as noted, this order does not restrict energy activities on tribal lands. Next slide, please. This map shows you the federal lands and mineral estate. The Bureau of Land Management manages approximately 245 million surface acres, shown here in yellow, as well as 700 million acres of the mineral estate. That's about 30% of our nation's minerals. Next slide, please. This is the legal framework for BLM's onshore oil and gas leasing program, also known as the parade of acronyms. Luckily for all of you, there will not be a test later on these acronyms, but we will use them throughout the presentation. The Mineral Leasing Act of 1920 established the authority for leasing federal fluid minerals, an initial royalty rate, rentals, and other terms. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, requires the Bureau of Land Management to look at environmental consequences to air, water, wildlife, wilderness, communities, environmental justice, and our climate, just to name a few, to engage the public and to consider alternatives prior to approving proposed actions. This law, in terms of both the scope of our environmental review and the opportunities for public engagement, have led to most of the litigation around this program and resulted in some holds on our current leasing guidance. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act, or FLPMA, establishes BLM's obligation to manage the public lands under the principles of multiple use and sustained yield, including for future generations. While energy development is one of the multiple uses, it is not elevated above others in this our governing law. Federal Onshore Oil and Gas Leasing Reform Act, or FUGLRA, directs the BLM to hold competitive lease sales, at least quarterly, for lands that are both eligible and available for leasing. The National Defense Authorization Act of 2014 permitted us to hold online auctions in addition to the in-person auction we've been holding. And the Naval Petroleum Reserves Production Act governs planning and leasing in the nation's national petroleum reserves, which includes the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska managed by BLM. Next slide, please. BLM's lands and resources, including the oil and gas that we manage across the nation, are managed under approximately 150 resource management plans, or RMPs. These are required by FLTMA and direct the BLM to manage, again, pursuant to multiple use and sustained yield, trying to balance resource use and protection and conservation. RMPs are the basis for all resource allocations, including oil and gas, and will identify lands as open or closed to leasing, as well as various degrees of detail on how subsequent oil and gas development can occur. Currently, most lands that are not legally required to be closed are open for oil and gas leasing under our RMPs. As a reminder, tribal lands are managed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and lands in the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska are subject to a different legal scheme for planning. Next slide, please. The BLM's leasing process, the onshore leasing process under the Mineral Leasing Act, consists of 3 steps: nominations, evaluation, and sales. Nominations or expressions of interests are informal requests for lands to be included in leases. At the evaluation stage, parcels are looked at to consider whether they're available and also to address environmental impacts. Lease sales are first held as a competitive sale as required by FLTMA. However, parcels that are not sold are available for non-competitive sales for 2 years after each sale. This is essentially an over-the-counter transaction. The successful bidder gains the exclusive right to develop the minerals, and leases are issued for a 10-year initial term, which may be extended by production. Tribal lands are leased by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and again, leasing in Alaska in the National Petroleum Reserve follows slightly different regulations. Next slide, please. Once a lease is obtained, an operator has to submit an application for permit to drill before drilling will be approved on the lease. At this point, conditions of approval are applied to govern development. This can require surveys to identify resources and will also identify measures to avoid or minimize harm to those resources. Initial NEPA analysis may be conducted at this stage, although BLM may also apply categorical exclusions from NEPA review or use determinations of NEPA adequacy instead. All development must comply with applicable laws and regulations, such as the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Clean Water and Clean Air Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, and the Endangered Species Act, just to name a few. The graph here shows APDs approved versus APDs received for fiscal years 2016 through 2020. In fiscal year 2016, approximately 2,500 applications for permit to drill were received, and less than 2,000 were approved. In contrast, in fiscal year 2017, less than 3,000 APDs were received, but more than 3,000 were approved. Beginning in fiscal year 2018 and continuing through 2020, the number of APDs approved was less than the amount of APDs received. However, throughout this time, there have remained thousands of approved and available permits. As of the end of January of this year, more than 7,600 APDs have been approved and are currently remaining available for use in drilling. At the same time, just over 5,300 APDs have been received and are pending processing and will be added to this total. Next slide, please. The environmental review process for oil and gas leasing and development is multifaceted, and so includes opportunities for input and coordination with tribes, local governments, federal and state agencies, and the public at various times. BLM's land use planning process provides for public and government engagement throughout the process at required comment periods and consultations. At the leasing phase, there may be public comment on BLM's environmental analysis, although it is not currently required on all aspects of sales. And there is an opportunity to submit a formal administrative process. There have been variations over the years on how the public, tribes, agencies, and local governments have been able to participate in this process under BLM's guidance, leading to some legal challenges along the way. At the permitting stage, The BLM posts the APD for 30 days online and may, but may not, provide an opportunity for comment. Next slide, please. Some of the key terms that govern onshore leasing and development include these: the bonus bid, which is a minimum of $2 an acre. For non-competitive leases, there is no bonus bid paid, just a rental fee of $1.50 an acre. Rents are paid until production of paying quantities, at which point royalties are paid instead. For the first 5 years of a lease, rent is $1.50 an acre. And after that, for the next 6 to 10 years, it goes up to, yes, $2 an acre. And notably, there are not a lot of other items you can purchase for this price in this day and age. The royalty rate was set at 12.5% in the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920, over 100 years ago. While this is set as a minimum in our regulations, the Bureau of Land Management does not generally apply any different rate. A higher rate is used in NPRA lease sales. Royalties once received, approximately half of those are shared with the states in which development is occurring. Minimum bond amounts were set generally in the 1950s and 60s for reclamation bonds, which are issued to bond for reclamation of a well after use is completed, are set at individual wells for $10,000, set in 1960. For all the wells in a state, $25,000, set in the 1950s. And for all the wells you might care to drill nationwide, $150,000, again, set in the 1950s. And yes, this is less than the amount required to register your car for insurance in most states. Next slide, please. I want to close out with a snapshot of the program as it exists right now. You can see that as of fiscal year 2020, we have 37,496 leases on 26.6 million acres. Less than half of those are currently in production, 12.7 million acres, with 13.9 million acres not in production. We have over 96,000 active federal wells, and the program contributes 7% of domestically produced oil and 8% of domestically produced natural gas. Through fiscal year 2020, we've received over $3.46 billion in revenues, including royalties, bonus bids, and rentals. As you can see from these statistics, the vast majority of income does come from royalties paid on producing leases. In fiscal year 2019, we estimated $71.5 billion of economic activity associated with the program, and that it generated 318 or supported 318,000 jobs. Next slide, please. Because the Executive Order 14008 directed a review of the entire federal oil and gas program, we and our panelists today will be looking at opportunities for improvement holistically. And so we're going to leave the land and head offshore, and I'm going to hand this over to Amanda Lefton, the Director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, to discuss offshore. And I look forward to hearing the panelists' presentation going forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nada. My name is Amanda Lefton. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I recognize that I live and work within the ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee and Mohican peoples. I acknowledge the place-based knowledge of these peoples and am grateful for their ancestral and current stewardship of these lands. Next slide, please. So in this brief presentation, I intend to provide an overview of BOEM, which is, again, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, BOEM's role in leasing and permitting in order to provide context for some key questions we hope to explore today as we work towards achieving the goals that President Biden laid out in Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis and abroad. So really, we're going to focus today on our overview of the offshore oil and gas leasing program. Next slide, please. So first, let me start with what BOEM is. So BOEM's mission is to manage the development of the US Outer Continental Shelf, which I'll call OCS going forward, manage the Outer Continental Shelf OCS energy and mineral resources in an environmentally and economically responsible way. And so that means that we have really a broad area of responsibility that primarily includes managing offshore oil and gas exploration, development of activities on the OCS, overseeing the development of renewable energy resources in federal waters, managing non-energy minerals, primarily sand and gravel, and ensuring that science-based environmental protection is at the forefront of our decision-making. As we seek to review the offshore federal leasing program in a comprehensive way, as envisioned in the order, we will primarily consider the royalties and other monies paid to the federal government to ensure that they amount to a fair return to the American taxpayer and account for corresponding costs to the climate. We also can imagine that there will be other opportunities to strengthen BOEM's approach to oil and gas program moving forward. Throughout this entire review, we will of course ensure that our actions respect government-to-government relationships with tribal nations and commit to principles of environmental justice in our decision-making. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this slide, the offshore oil and gas program currently focuses on planning and building the national program, which is a 5-year schedule of lease sales. It focuses on conducting the lease sales and ensuring fair market value is paid, reviewing exploration and development plans to ensure that they adhere to the lease terms and regulations, evaluating the location and quantity of resources, as well as other considerations laid out here, namely financial assurances, economic analysis, environmental studies, and so on. Next slide, please. So critical to note is that our authority to operate this program comes primarily from the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, also known as OXLA, and the regulations that put out the law into action, which is found at 30 CFR 550-599. The National OCS oil and gas leasing program provides the basis for many, if not all, of these activities, including the National OCS program, which consists of our 5-year schedule for oil and lease gas sales. It is set by the Secretary of Interior based on rigorous assessment of available resources, extensive environmental review, and thorough economic analysis. OSCLA requires that we take into account economic, social, and environmental values, as well as the potential impacts of oil and gas exploration on marine, coastal, and human environment. For instance, the Act specifies that there must be equitable sharing of developments of benefits and environmental risks. The current 5-year national OCS program plans for 11 sales, 10 in the Gulf of Mexico, 1 offshore Alaska between 2017 and 22, and the program is set to expire at the end of June 2022. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this very busy slide, this essentially goes over the planning and pre-leasing steps for BOEM as we develop the 5-year schedule and the national program for oil and gas leasing. I want to point to a couple of things on the slide. First, the yellow boxes, that's what indicates the various opportunities for public comment as the national program is developed. The highlighted red blocks show the layers of environmental analysis that occur throughout the process. First, we start at a programmatic level as we develop an EIS, and then we get into more specific site-down analysis in the later part of the process. So you can see the entire evolution of developing the 5-year program for the National OCS Oil and Leasing Program here, starting with a request for nomination, going into a draft proposed EIS, all the way through program approval, and then ultimately the leasing schedule itself, which again calls for a nomination, continues with an additional environmental analysis, all the way up to a lease sale and leases being issued. We utilize, of course, NEPA review as part of this and have government to government consultations all throughout the process, from the very beginning to the very end of the development of the program, all the way to the leases being issued themselves. Next slide, please. Before a lease sale, BOEM considers fiscal terms, preliminary lease sale term, the duration, lease stipulations, and other information for bidders. After the sale, but before lease's issuance, each lease also undergoes a review to ensure receipt of fair market value. This analysis is meant to ensure that the leases issued on the public's behalf are based on sound economics. Again, as noted, as required by the executive order, BOEM is considering ways to adjust royalty rates for future leases to incorporate corresponding climate costs. At this point, as you can see from this slide, we have 2,348 active leases covering about 12.5 million acres in the OCS. The production from these leases account for 15% of oil produced in the United States and 2% of the gas. In 2020, the department collected over $3 billion in revenues from OCS leases alone. I just want to note that what you can see on this slide primarily actually is in the Gulf of Mexico, where the majority of those leases are held. Next slide, please. Before permits are issued, a number of environmental reviews occur. So as shown here, first at the programmatic level, so that's a big picture review, then working down to more site-specific NEPA for each geological and geophysical surveys. The Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement is responsible for overseeing the actual operations, and BOEM coordinates with them to work collectively to promote safety and to protect the environment. Next slide, please. BOEM conducts environmental analysis and scientific research to assist in our decisions about the development of the OCS. Every year, we fund and facilitate rigorous studies. These studies are included in a wide variety of disciplines, such as physical oceanography, atmospheric sciences, biology, protected species, social science and economics, submerged cultural resources, and environmental fates and effects. Next slide, please. Some of this work has addressed managing resources amid a changing climate. Ecosystem science studies try to discern effects of the OCS activity from those in a changing climate. During environmental reviews, BOEM considers how resources are affected both by activities we regulate and the changing world. We also collect data on criteria air pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions through our web-based emissions reporting tool, which is the OCS AQS, if anyone is interested. And we evaluate both upstream and downstream emissions associated with OCS production. These results were monetized using the social cost of carbon for sales in the 2017 and 2022 program, which again, we are currently in. Next slide, please. Today, we're continuing the conversation about policies and processes the Department of Interior should examine in its comprehensive review of the federal oil and gas leasing program. Again, keeping in mind the goals of the Executive Order 14008, tackling climate crisis at home and abroad. We will use this information to further solicit ideas, information, and analysis for the review. So today, as Laura noted, is one important opportunity to have a conversation about the comprehensive review, what should be included as we move forward, and the critical substance and expert feedback that needs to be acknowledged. So next slide, please. To that end, we invite you to please submit additional information for us to consider. As you submit this information, we appreciate substantive expert feedback rather than a large quantity. It would be incredibly helpful to understand sort of the key substance that should be considered. Laura said already the email address to send it to, but I'll repeat it here and you can see it on this slide. Additional information should be submitted to energyreview@ios.doi.gov. We are asking for you please to provide the input, should you choose to do it, by April 15th of 2021. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Connie, who can go over some housekeeping before she introduces the next panel. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amanda, Nada, and Laura, for your presentations. I do have a couple of housekeeping notes. Since this is a Zoom webinar, your microphone and video will be disabled for the event. There will be no chat function, but if you need to leave the Zoom webinar, you can also rejoin the event at doi.gov/events, where there will also be live captioning. And now, Laura, Amanda, and Nada, I'd ask you to turn your cameras back on, please. Okay, and now we'll begin the panel and presentation part of the forum. We will hear presentations and questions and answers by invited trade associations, by invited individuals representing environmental justice and frontline communities, academia, oil and gas industry trade associations, indigenous organizations, conservation organizations, and labor groups. Each panelist will be brought onto the screen for a 5-minute presentation. There will be a 5-minute timer on the screen, and we ask that presenters please adhere to the time limits. There will be the question and answer session after each panel. So we will begin with presentations from our indigenous experts. Joining us are Fawn Sharp, the president of the National Congress of American Indians, Mario Atencio, the board of directors from Diné Care, Nicole Bo-Romeo, the executive vice president and general counsel of Alaska Federation of Natives. Fawn, when you're ready, you can begin.
Oh, Yohuch, Anshek Hawishka. Good morning from my traditional homelands here at the Quinault Nation. We are located on the coast of Washington State. I am so incredibly honored to be here today to share some remarks with you, Sioquio. On behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, thank you for holding this virtual forum to discuss the federal oil and gas program. I am Fawn Sharp, president of the Quinault Indian Nation and president of the National Congress of American Indians, the oldest and largest organization comprised of sovereign tribal nations and their citizens. Executive Order 14008, Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, outlines a broad approach to addressing our national climate crisis that takes into account the nation's need for energy resources and independence. NCAI thanks the administration and Interior for their commitment to not only include, but to listen to and act upon the expressed needs of Indian country. Tribal nations are at the forefront and on the front lines of the climate crisis, responding to sea level rise, coastal erosion, ocean acidification, increased frequency and intensity of wildfires, and altered seasonal duration. It threatens the health, cultures, and economies of tribal nations and their citizens. For example, my own tribal nation is involved in a multi-year $60 million relocation project of the village of Tahola because the health, safety, and property of hundreds of our citizens are being lost to sea level rise and devastating storm surges. Sadly, my nation's struggles are not unique and represent only a portion of the climate-related concerns in Indian country. Vigorously working to mitigate and reverse the effects of these threats is on the minds of every tribal leader. As such, it is absolutely necessary that whatever steps are taken by the administration, the unique political and legal status of tribal nations and their citizens must be recognized. Climate solutions for Indian country must be developed in partnership with tribal nations and meet the federal government's trust and treaty responsibility, as well as the principles outlined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Department of Interior has an important role to play in addressing the climate crisis facing Indian country, while at the same time supporting tribal energy development. Energy resources on tribal lands are vast, largely untapped, and critical to the economic stability of many tribal nations and their citizens. Interior has estimated the tribal energy reserves on Indian lands could generate up to $1 trillion for tribal nation and surrounding communities, most of which are located in rural areas. Existing tribal energy revenues provide billions of dollars to tribal nations and individual Indian resource owners. These funds support tribal government services and individual citizens. They are also important to America's efforts to achieve energy independence and security and promote economic development, both inside and outside of Indian country. The development of Indian energy resources is a complex procedural and economic process that is carried out in part through tribal specific grant and lease approvals by Interior. This process involves many stakeholders, including federal and state agencies, tribal governments, individual Indian mineral owners, private oil and gas operators, financing structures, and competing tribal interests. It is necessary for the administration and Interior to understand that too often, well-intentioned but overly broad responses to the climate crisis are not good for all of Indian country. For example, Secretarial Order 3395 initially announced a temporary pause on new oil and gas leases on public lands. Initially, this secretarial order raised significant concerns for tribal nations, not the least of which was the order's lack of clarity in distinguishing tribal from federal lands. While the administration later clarified that the pause did not affect tribal lands because tribal lands are not federal lands, the situation highlights some of the intricacies in addressing the climate crisis through administrative action, which affect Indian energy development. Additionally, it is critical that the administration continues to recognize tribal nations' inherent right to regulate energy resources on tribal lands in order to protect sacred landscapes, waters, and cultural practices of future generations. In conclusion, like other governments within the United States, tribal governments want to solve the social, cultural, and economic climate threats that face our communities. Tribal nations also want to ensure their citizens have jobs and local economies, of which they are an integral part of and often flourish within not only our regions, but locally. Tribal leaders and administrators are a brain trust of solutions. We know our energy resources and how best to manage them. We know our cultural heritage and how best to protect it. We also know the bold plan laid out in Executive 14008 provides a unique opportunity to lift up all of Indian country. Therefore, it is critical that the federal government's approach not only take into account, but is accountable to its trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations and its commitment to the principles of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. With that, I'd like to thank you for your time today and the opportunity to speak to these critically important issues, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Siokwe.
Thank you, Fawn, for your presentation. Please turn your camera off. I will now turn it over to Mario Atencio from the Board of Directors of Diné Care. Please turn your camera on for your 5-minute presentation.
Thank you to the organizers and to the other panelists here. I'm calling from New Mexico, from the occupied lands of the Tiwa people in Albuquerque, because there's a good internet here. And so I needed to be at this very important meeting. I'm here to say that for far too long, the people in the Eastern Navajo Agency have been living an environmentally racist horror show. How does this happen? What do you mean by that? How is it environmentally racist? 2016, oil well of a horizontally fracked well exploded within the exterior boundaries of the Naizi chapter house, which is maybe less than a mile from the entry point to the Chalco Cultural National Historic Park. 50 families had to be evacuated. And even then, there's still no emergency plan in place to how to respond to an oil well explosion. Then in February 17th, 2019 on in and around lands which my mother and father, our allotment holders are, who are in direct trust relationship with the federal government. Fracking water spill, fracked water, fracked fluid spilled on our land and may have contaminated groundwater. 50,000 gallons of frack water, and about 1,000 gallons of oil. Very important to point out that there was no follow-up by anybody. Everybody touched their hands on this spill. 50,000 gallons is 1,000 barrels in the New Mexico Tech. It's a mining college in New Mexico. Has said that the worst case scenario for a fracking fluid happening in Sandoval County is about 25,000 gallons. And so this was double the worst case scenario as analyzed by New Mexico Tech. No follow-up, nothing being done there. So you take this and then let's go down to environmental justice. All of these communities through the Farmington Field Office Resource Management Plan labels all of the Navajo communities as environmental justice communities. And we just seen with the last administration, there was a coordinated attack on the CEQ, basically the 1998 guidance on environmental justice. They attacked definitions of indirect effects and cumulative impacts from oil and gas in the region. The RMP was a really horribly done analysis inside the plan itself. And so we saw it as a complete failure as a trustee to even to the people who are in trust relationship with the federal government in Northwest New Mexico, which is one of the most sacred landscapes to many tribes, 19 tribes, I think, in county. And so consultation, and so all of this would have been eased if consultation happened. There's guidance on consultation. The GEO report released a report last year on how tribes need to be consulted. BI, BIA, BLM all have these great documents that show how to do consultation. And at every single point, nothing has been meaningful. And we've been saying this on record over and over and over. At one point, BLM walked out of their own consultation meeting with tribes. And so what does this look like? So to close, I really want to highlight $1 billion of wealth has come out of the counselor chapter house community within Northwest New Mexico. And it seems like the community got even poorer because of the oil and gas in the ground. So thank you for this time. We've got 10 seconds left. And I really am thankful for this time and really want to welcome questions. And if I can answer them, I will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. I will now turn it over to Nicole Borromeo, the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the Alaska Federation of Natives. Nicole?
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Nicole Borromeo, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for the Alaska Federation of Natives. On behalf of AFN, I want to thank the department for hosting this forum and for inviting us to participate. AFN is the oldest and largest statewide Native organization in Alaska. Our membership includes 169 federally recognized tribes, 12 regional Native nonprofit organizations or tribal consortia that contract and compact to administer federal programs under the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, and 9 regional and 164 Alaska Native for-profit corporations that were formed under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Our mission, among other things at AFN, is to advance and enhance the political voice of the Alaska Native community on issues of mutual concern, including the energy policy of the nation as it relates to oil and gas. I would like to use our limited time today to underscore that by and large, Alaska Natives and AFN support responsible natural resource development because it forms the foundation of Alaska's economy. Accept that climate change is real because our people have consistently adapted to those changes in climate throughout the centuries. Favor an energy policy at the national level that includes traditional forms as well as emerging renewables, because this is the best practice in our view. Know that it is possible to harvest rare earth elements in harmony with our traditional subsistence practices because our fish and game populations tell us so. And embrace Alaska's unique form of self-determination, which includes our native corporations, many of which do business in the energy sphere. To the first point, Alaska is an energy state. We are home to the largest oil field in North America at Prudhoe Bay, as well as wind farms at Fire Island, hydro projects in the Nushagak River, and other renewable technologies such as biomass and solar. However, no energy sector does more for Alaska's economy than oil and gas. Oil and gas accounts for approximately 25% of all jobs and wages within our state and employs tens of thousands of Alaska Native families through a Native utilization agreement that was negotiated by the Interior Department and Alyeska Pipeline. This agreement has steered hundreds of millions of dollars to Alaska Native families over the decades through jobs and wages. Because Alaska is an energy state, Alaska Natives know that the demand for energy is increasing, and the 30 by 30 plan to move away from fossil fuels will not lessen that demand. The US has gained many benefits from becoming energy independent, and we should not gain that ground that has been lost. To the second point, Alaska is also on the front lines of a changing climate. Alaska Natives know that the earth is warming, water temperatures are rising, storms are intensifying, and protecting the planet for future generations is our collected and shared responsibility. President Biden is right to focus on climate change and environmental justice. However, AFN respectfully asks the administration to implement a measured shift away from traditional forms of energy to emerging opportunities. AFN also asks that an equitable share of federal resources from Executive Order 14008 for disadvantaged communities be set aside for Alaska. Our state literally has 30 communities that are on the verge of falling into the sea or river during the next major fall or winter storm. To the third point, Alaska Natives do not operate in an either or space when it comes to the nation's energy policy. We favor both traditional and emerging forms because a combination of both best serves our state and our people. The Alaska Native community refuses to be caught between extraction industries and environmental conservation groups. Our people live comfortably between both. To the fourth point, subsistence hunting and fishing is critically important to Alaska Natives. We use our seasonal harvests as our check and balance to energy projects within the state, particularly those involving extraction. This is how we know we're being good stewards of the land, and this is how we know that we are passing those high marks. As such, AFN believes that oil and gas projects can go forward with proper environmental safeguards. And we encourage the Biden and Harris administration to work with private industry on existing operations, namely the Willow Project in Alaska. Finally, Alaska Native self-determination is the gold standard because of the way in which we settled our land claims with the federal government and created Alaska Native corporations. Those corporations today hold 44 million acres of land, many of which abut and are adjacent to federal lands. Decisions made by the department therefore have an outsized impact on Alaska Natives, particularly with respect to oil and gas. Alaska Natives selected our lands through ANCSA for its oil and gas development potential. We should be able to develop those opportunities instead of being penalized. Thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We'll now have a 10-minute Q&A discussion with our panelists and interior leaders. So Fawn, Mario, and Nicole, please turn your cameras back on, and I'll turn it over to you, Laura, Nada, and Amanda.
Great. This is Laura. I'm going to kick it off, and we're going to do our very best here to try and be interactive. This is a very hard setting, but we're all getting used to it after a year. So I'm going to kick it off, and then we're going to go around, and you guys should kind of jump in and out as makes sense. And again, thanks to all of you for taking the time to be here. And I think we might start in the order in which you appeared, but then, like I said, we're hoping to mix it up and be a little bit interactive. So President Sharp, it's really an honor to see you again, and really also an honor to have you with us today. And I appreciate your comments so much. And this is a bit of a high level question, but just digging in a little bit in terms of, as we are looking at the oil and gas leasing and permitting programs, are there sort of, specific practices beyond, I think everyone mentioned consultation, that we can be doing better to better honor our trust responsibility to Indian country as we are looking at all these processes?
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate that question. And as you could imagine, with President Biden's executive order on consultation, there's a renewed energy around Indian country to step back and really imagine what's our vision for how we want to directly engage with the United States. And the first basic principle is we seek political equality at the table. Government to government discussions are bilateral. And when we come to the table, we should be able to be honored, respected, and we want to seek not only consultation, but consent. And so having regularly scheduled meetings between agency decision makers and leaders, it would be helpful. Educating all staff on the government to government relationship and making training available to tribal nations to comment would be another suggestion. I think broadly incorporating the principles of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples would be very consistent and in line with our vision for how we're going to continue to advance and improve the relationship with the United States, and specifically the Department of Interior.
Great. That was really specific, and thank you. And I was taking notes. I'm sure you saw me looking down. So thank you. Nada, did you want to jump in and ask a question of Mr. Tencio?
Sure. Mario, the descriptions you gave of the impacts in your community were very evocative, and I don't think you got a chance to describe in detail some of the suggestions you might have of how we could better engage with your community and others in that area, slightly different than the consultation process, maybe broader, but would love to hear some broader ideas from you about how to better engage your communities going forward, and including how we might better capture the impacts you described that you also called indirect effects and cumulative. So speaking the NEPA language, which we really appreciate also.
Yes, thank you, Nada. Thank you for the question. How can the Department of Interior be better? In the EJ final guidance, it says that NEPA specialists need to have full understanding of the cultural impacts of federal actions. And we are saying that within that, at the very least, that that consultation go before, at the very least, the quorum of the local community chapter house and Eastern Navajo agency. And in there, that the language, there might have to be, there's even language barriers there. And so it seems to be that the best way forward, speaking from as a spokesperson of individual Indian allotment holders and as a board member of a Navajo Nation, of a Navajo nonprofit, is that's where it has to come down. And in there, the consideration of the people, and for them to really understand that to have this facility of a well pad that has 6 or 7 wells on it, that it's going to require a synthetic minor permit for the synthetic minor air permit what's it called, to release air toxics into the environment. That's a very hard, that's multiple levels of jumping through and explaining in Navajo to the people that over 100 tons of volatile organic compounds are going to be permitted to be released into your community. And to explain what volatile organic compounds and just how many hazardous air pollutants are going to be, that you're going to okay to be dumped into your community, and what do hazardous air pollutants means, and then going to the list from EPA, what does that mean? That they're cancer causing, right? Because they're identified as HAPs. So that is a long way to talk to people. And right now we see consultation as Dear Tribal leader letters and postings at a store in the middle of nowhere and saying, oh, that's a consultation. And so getting down into the community and putting resources in there to present it in the indigenous language to the people. And there they can really decide and describe what it is you're asking from them, especially if you are talking from the lot T level. That's one thing I see as a good way to get this going forward. And I think, I guess, with these field offices is to really put forward those tribal outreach coordinators. I think Farmington field office had a Navajo specific outreach person, but all of a sudden was expanded to like 25 tribes, when in the legal proceedings it's supposed to be just for the Navajo people. But then it just seems like you need to hire more people than just the one person. So that's one thing quickly off right at the top of my head, Director.
Thank you. Maynard, did you want to jump in?
No, I just couldn't achieve the unmute, the opposite problem. So thank you very much, Mario. It's a lot to think about. And I'll pass it to Amanda.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for those really important and terrific presentations. I had a follow-up question for Nicole. I really was interested in your comments about how Alaska is an energy state, and also, really acknowledging that Alaska is in many ways on the front line of climate change. And you talked a little bit about those emerging energy alternatives. I guess I'm curious, from your perspective, as the department moves forward, what Alaska-specific interests, policies, or practices should we consider as we continue to review the oil and gas leasing and permitting program, sort of in that context of climate change and otherwise, from your perspective?
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to piggyback on what President Sharp and Mario have already said in terms of consultation. First and foremost, we want to make sure that when the department consults with Alaska Natives, it includes all Alaska Natives, including our corporations. The department has a legal obligation under the 2005 Consolidated Appropriations Act to be consulting with our Native corporations on the same basis as tribal governments. So we would like our whole community present when these discussions are had, first and foremost. And in terms of the other part of your question, we don't view this, like I said, as an either or. We have to pick fossil fuel or we have to just transition tomorrow to more renewables. We understand that the earth is changing, the climate is warming, all of that. But it needs to be a measured, thought out process. We're very concerned that if we just turn the light switch off up here in Alaska and switch from oil and gas over to renewables, that our 200 plus Native communities that are reliant on diesel generators that are essentially on microgrids, they're just not going to be able to step up fast enough for these renewable opportunities. They are also very expensive. We're not sure how they're going to be funded out in extremely remote areas of our state where it's hard to get federal resources on the ground as it is.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to ask kind of a broad question. I'm hoping everyone can maybe jump in on this one. And I think it's a natural follow on. I'm going to kind of put some focus on the Bureau of Land Management and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and ask how they, and of course the department, can be a better partner with tribes during this review, certainly in future decision-making processes on federal oil and gas development, but under the self-governance policy. So we'd like to be sure we are thinking about that as well.
Yes, I would like to jump in on this question. Thank you. That's a critically important question. And it's also important for everyone to understand that we have sacred sites. We have places where we go to practice our ceremonies and express our cultures. Those are extremely important to tribal nations. Those are the places where we draw on our strength, our resilience, and our resolve. And it's going to be very important moving forward in looking through a self-governance lens that when we look at a piece of land that for some it may look like a sacred site and have certain characteristics, but we have traditional and immense ecological knowledge that goes back for millennia, from when time began, that is rich and valuable. And so in our relationship and in the self-governance lens, it's so very important to understand those resources from our perspective, and more than just land, but truly the strength and the power that lies within our sacred sites and our traditional ecological knowledge. Because for us to solve these challenges, we have to consider all sources of knowledge, and we have an incredible brain trust with Indian country. But in that respect, I think that's one way that relations can be improved through the self-governance process.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Thanks. It would be helpful in our point of view if there was a little bit more back and forth in terms of consultation. Right now, we have to hunt down Dear Tribal Leader letters. We're not sure where they're published all the time. We know that legally they have to be in the Federal Register, but that thing is a mammoth of a document to be combing through every day. And then when the consultation happens, it's for a short amount of time. Our tribes have a limited window to present. There's not a lot of back and forth and follow up. And then a rule will get released. We're then supposed to go through the same process again of hunting it down, appearing for a couple hours. And in Alaska, there's 229 tribes. You know, there's the same number of Native corporations up here. So having just 3 consultations countrywide, limiting one to Alaska, is really a disservice to the input that we hope to provide throughout this process and other processes as well, involving the oil and gas and plan through Executive Order 14008. So if we could have a little bit more dialogue in general, we would really appreciate that. And the last thing I'll add is please come to us. Let us be your host when you have these issues, and let us show you our lands. Don't necessarily just rely on what private industry or environmental groups are saying. We want to be the ones to take you and to show you. And lastly, in Alaska, that means you're going to have to stay probably a week or so, because it's going to take you a day to get here, a day to adjust up in Anchorage, and then we got to get out to the bush. We need to travel. If you put Alaska over the lower 48, we would span from Florida to California, all the way up into the Dakotas. So it takes time to see what you need to see up here. And we got to get you out of Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And I just want to appreciate the invitation to all of us to get to Alaska. And also wanted to say, we really appreciate too, you, as you know, we're reviewing our consultation policy as well. So these very specific suggestions are going to be critically important for us in that vein. And we'll be going back and talking more with Brian Newland, who I think all of you know. And so anyway, we're committed to getting better and doing better. So thank you for hitting on that. And Mario?
Yes, so we're gonna pick on BIA because they're not here. I guess they talk about self-governance. Just want to kind of focus the microscope. We had a Section 106 National Historic Preservation Act tribal meeting, and it was there to talk about the stipulations of a programmatic agreement within the Greater Chaco landscape. Very important, it's at the nexus of tribal government, tribal sovereignty, and sacred sites and sacred site protection. And it would seem like the whole process was being rammed down our throats. And I got very abrasive in those meetings, even to the point where the Navajo area director then said, oh, they can show up while a global pandemic is raging. Oh, they can show up, they'll find a workaround. I go outside, I stand on top of a hill, and I'm okay. Tone deaf, completely disregarding all sense of respect for the tribes there. Individual Nilatis, that's our trustee saying that to us, and I'm really getting worked up in these meetings. And out of just complete disrespect to all of the the TIPOs that are in the room also. Not only that, but then having these meetings, hundreds of miles away in population centers, way away from Chaco itself and away from the communities. And so if you're going to have, in order to to be better, and how can they be better partners, is that they have to be down in the community and put time and effort into those communities, and to really see, be at a meeting place and say, we want to hear what you are thinking, and let's. That's what I want to say right off the back. It just jumps out clearly, and I want to highlight that for the group. And so somehow the Farmington Indian Minerals Office is a special office that's in there that has to do with minerals, and then Farm Interior. Um, and because I say all of this is that the BIA specialist is doing the environmental justice analysis. And like, is he trained? Does he know how to do all of this? So to be better, there has to be the left hand talking with the right. I don't know how many heads there are at the DOI, but yeah, they all have to sort of come together and talk together, and there has to be guidance. So that's one thing. So thank you.
Thank you. And I want to say that, to my surprise, I feel like we were, just getting into some good back and forth, but I am told with a note that we're at the end of time for this panel. So I do, again, just want to appreciate so much all of you taking the time to be here with us. I think the sort of really thoughtful and specific recommendations and advice you've given us are exactly what we were looking for today. So I appreciate how much time I know you must have put into thinking about what what it would be good for us to hear. So just thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Quiana.
Thank you to our Indigenous experts. We'll now return you back to the audience, and we will welcome our next group of experts, which is our industry experts. That includes Wendy Kershaw, the Vice President of Regulatory Policy for American Exploration and Production Council, Eric Melito, who is the President of the National Ocean Industries Association, and Frank Macchiarola, the Senior Vice President for Policy, Economics, and Regulatory Affairs for the American Petroleum Institute. Wendy, if you can turn your camera on.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Wendy, go ahead.
Great. So I respectfully address this panel today on behalf of the American Exploration and Production Council. We are a national trade that represents America's largest onshore independent oil and natural gas exploration and production companies. We appreciate this opportunity to offer the perspective of operators who take on the risk and investment to produce these essential taxpayer-owned resources. Some of our members also operate on tribal and Alati lands where they engage in responsible development. And we do hope that BLM carefully understands our trust responsibility and consultation requirements to these energy producing tribes. As we've just heard, the agency's programs may unduly impact mineral development in Indian country that BLM oversees. Our companies are highly conscientious about working with and listening to the communities and the people in the places where we operate. What we often hear from families and businesses in these communities near federal oil and gas development is that they depend upon the good paying jobs and local commerce that development brings, often in America's remote and rural areas. People in these towns are concerned that without these projects, their communities would severely suffer. They share fears that with the loss of these jobs and business activity, their towns would dry up as there are no replacement jobs locally waiting for them. Cutting oil and gas production on federal lands does not provide climate benefit, as production will likely just shift elsewhere, but it will take good paying jobs from these people and from these communities. The responsible development of federal minerals, a fair return to the taxpayer, and issues like climate change are important conversations to have. And AXPC does want to be a part of those conversations. But as policy changes are considered, it's important that we take care to protect these people and their livelihoods, who may otherwise be disproportionately impacted. As the agency knows well, and as Director Culver unpacked very thoroughly, development on federal lands requires substantial analysis throughout what is a lengthy and complicated process. Before acreage is leased and throughout the process, BLM undertakes multiple steps to ensure environmental protections are in place, the public is consulted, and appropriate conditions are applied. DOI historically has acknowledged that more time and capital is needed to drill on federal land and took this into account in the development of lease terms. A lease listed as non-producing does not mean that progress is lagging or absent on that leasehold. The process takes time and it offers no guarantees, meaning not every lease contains recoverable reserves, and it takes time to figure that out. Interior statistics show that since 2009, there has been a steady trend of less onshore federal acreage being leased, but also more of those leases being held by production. In other words, through innovation and efficiency, operators are producing much more with far less acreage and with less surface impacts as well. Revenues have also increased substantially, providing billions in benefits to the American people. In 2019 alone, onshore revenues totaled over $4.2 billion, not only in royalties, but nearly a third is comprised of bonuses, interest payments, fees, and rentals paid regardless of whether there is production. Disbursements go primarily to states and local communities. And as mentioned earlier, these operations support hundreds of thousands of American jobs and millions to local businesses and communities as a result of those jobs and expenses needed to support operations. Everything from local diners to hotels to grocery stores. DOI has long recognized these realities in its management of the federal oil and gas program, which is proven essential to our country. The development of minerals also has contributed positively to the US response to climate change through emission reduction on federal lands and by supporting the increased use of natural gas. According to a 2018 USGS study, the extraction of oil and natural gas from federal lands accounts for just 0.6% of the total US greenhouse gas emissions, an intensity that is proportionately much less than the energy and economic value these activities provide. Research points to the role that responsible development of federal lands can play as part of the broader solution, whereas stopping this development merely shifts production elsewhere and does nothing to reduce global emissions. The US can continue to lead climate solutions through technology, innovation, and the promotion of the global use of US produced natural gas. AXPC members are proud to cultivate energy from federal resources and do not take lightly our commitment to the communities where we operate, nor our responsibility to steward those lands in our care. We appreciate the opportunity to provide this testimony. We will also provide you with written comments to better address these issues and aid in your work. We stand ready to work with the department on its review of this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. You can please turn your camera off. And now I will turn it over to Eric Melito. He's the president of the National Ocean Industries Association. Eric?
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Eric Melito and I'm the president of the National Ocean Industries Association. And we represent the offshore energy industry. This includes offshore oil and gas and offshore wind. And the companies that have built out the offshore oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico are many of the same companies in the supply chain that are poised, planning, and already participating in the build out of the emerging US offshore wind sector. Next slide, please. Our industry has been investing heavily in renewables, in low carbon solutions, and advancing technologies to continue to reduce emissions. But we recognize that moving forward, the global economy is going to rely upon all sources of energy, including oil and natural gas, really for decades to come, so that the global society can maintain a high standard of living. It is through energy like oil and gas that we're able to lift society from the depths of poverty and reduce hunger and raise levels of education and healthcare. And when we look at US policy and the federal leasing program, the offshore oil and gas federal leasing program really does stand out as part of the solution that can help us balance the need for energy security, national security, addressing climate change, job growth, economic growth, and safeguarding the environment. Next slide, please. The Gulf of Mexico has long been a prolific energy producing region, and it serves as that today. The Gulf of Mexico remains one of the top energy producing regions in the world. Our industry supports more than 300,000 jobs. Many of them are concentrated along the Gulf Coast, but we support employees and companies in every state in the nation. And these are high-paying jobs. Many of these workers involved in offshore oil and gas work, they make more than 80,000, more than 100,000, sometimes 150,000 a year for blue-collar jobs. And there are all sorts of companies throughout the supply chain. Our membership includes family-owned businesses, small businesses, businesses owned by African Americans. We have a company that is owned by a tribal nation that is a leaseholder. We have companies that are owned by Native Americans and among others. In addition, Amanda talked about the Director Lefton talked about the money flowing into the federal government. The oil and gas industry in the offshore has generated more than $120 billion over the past 20 years in the form of bonus bids, royalties, and rentals. And we fund more than $350 million a year for the GOMESA revenue sharing, the money that goes to the Gulf Coast states for the purpose of coastal resiliency, wetlands restoration, money that's vital to addressing the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. In addition to the economic benefits, when recognizing that the global society will continue to rely on oil and gas, it's important to look at the carbon footprint of the different producing regions. And the data continues to show that the offshore oil and gas producing region has the lowest carbon barrels. This is due to the scale, the level of investment, the level of innovation, the continuous advancement of technology to reduce emissions, the tight controls on methane from both a regulatory and an operational approach. Next slide, please. This has been validated in the course of developing the 5-year program that we're in. As part of that robust analysis during the Obama administration back in 2016, an analysis was completed of the GHG emissions impact from the leasing program. And the conclusion was GHG emissions would be higher if BOEM were to have no lease sales. This is due from because of substitutions that would occur from international sources that would be more carbon intensive, and also the added emissions that would come from having to ship and transport those supplies from foreign sources. Next slide, please. Our industry is also the funder of, and we fund virtually all of the money that goes into the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's close to $4 billion, covering more than 40,000 projects. This is important funding for protection of public lands and waters and conservation programs. Next slide, please. As part of this program, Congress created in 2014 the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program. This provides funding to build and repair parks in economically distressed urban neighborhoods. So it is through offshore oil and gas revenues that we've been able to help disadvantaged communities. More than 50 of them have access to outdoor recreation programs like parks. Right here you can see Jesse Allen Park in Newark. Other cities that have gotten this funding include Milwaukee and Philadelphia. So this is a region that is helping address even urban communities' needs. Next slide, please. U.S. offshore oil and gas is also subject to among the most stringent oversight and regulation in the world. Over the past 10 plus years, the agencies have ramped up the regulations, improved the regulations to make sure we're in the best position possible, to make sure we can prevent incidents from occurring. Next slide, please. This includes the requirement for companies to access to these technologies you see. This is HWCG and MWCC. Companies must have access to these multi-million-dollar, in this case, these technologies have cost more than $1 billion. You must have access to that before you can operate so that we can safeguard the marine environment. Next slide, please. The Rigs to Reef program has been very successful in creating and supporting flourishing marine ecosystems. These facilities also can be multi-purposed and repurposed moving forward for research and development into new and emerging low carbon technologies. Next slide. I just close by making the point that we understand that the global economy is working together to move forward and advance the aims of the Paris Climate Agreement. But as we look 10, 20, 30 years into the future, we recognize that we're going to need oil and natural gas. And here in the US, we have tremendous benefits flowing from our offshore oil and gas sector. And this sector stands to be the innovator that we can rely upon to help us balance the need for energy security, job growth, and moving forward toward a lower carbon society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. I will now turn it over to Frank Macchiarola, the Senior Vice President for Policy, Economics, and Regulatory Affairs for the American Petroleum Institute. Frank, can you please turn your camera on? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Macurola. I'm Senior Vice President of Policy, Economics, and Regulatory Affairs at the American Petroleum Institute, the national trade association representing all aspects of the oil and gas industry. The United States is now the global leader in both energy production and emissions reductions, due in large part to the innovation and commitment of the oil and gas industry. For many years, we've worked collaboratively with the Department of the Interior to help ensure the continued safety of industry workers and the protection of the environment. And we look forward to continuing this partnership as you undertake this evaluation of the oil and gas leasing program. We understand the importance of this review, and we appreciate your consultation with us in this process. Today, I will address three main points. First, oil and natural gas leasing on federal lands and waters provides a broad range of benefits to the American people, and a ban on leasing would have harmful consequences. Second, the oil and natural gas industry is part of the solution in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, just today, API announced a 5-point climate action plan to address the risks of climate change while continuing to meet the growing demand for energy. And third, I will refute claims that the industry is stockpiling leasing and permits. First, the oil and gas industry is essential to America's post-pandemic recovery and long-term economic growth. Oil and natural gas development on federal lands and waters provides affordable and reliable and cleaner energy, supports millions of good-paying jobs, provides billions of dollars to federal and state governments, and supports conservation efforts across the country. In 2019 alone, the LWCF, which is funded almost entirely by offshore oil and gas revenues, distributed over $227 million across the country for outdoor recreation and conservation efforts. Policies aimed at slowing or stopping oil and natural gas production also prove harmful to our national security. U.S. energy demand is likely to continue to rise, and it's vital that the energy we use is produced right here at home. We urge you to expedite this review. A study we commissioned found that a long-term leasing and development ban could result in more than 2 million additional barrels of oil per day being imported to meet energy needs and nearly 1 million American jobs lost. Second, we continue to support the Biden administration's climate goals, and we can do that without banning or significantly curtailing oil and gas development. From 2005 to 2020, EIA reports that energy-related CO2 emissions in the US declined by more than 23%. With smart policies, we can help other countries meet their environmental goals, such as promoting exports of US LNG. But we can only do it if we utilize our own resources. The oil and gas industry is investing billions toward new innovative technologies to improve environmental performance and further reduce emissions. This includes enhanced monitoring through investments in satellite, drone, and aerial GHG detection technologies. For offshore operations, leak detection measures can include periodic monitoring using optical gas monitoring or other technologies. Because of these efforts, according to USGS, GHG emissions from the production and combustion of oil and natural gas from federal lands accounted for less than 10% of total US GHG emissions. Meeting energy demands without production on federal lands and waters only means our imports would increase from countries with weaker environmental standards. It also means we'd be reducing US production of natural gas, the single most effective resource in reducing emissions from the electricity sector. Our study found that forcing a decrease in domestic production of natural gas will likely lead to higher GHG emissions, the opposite effect of the administration's stated goal. Third, I want to clearly state that the industry is not stockpiling leases or permits. Non-producing leases are not inactive. It takes several years of due diligence and sizable investment for a company to analyze the underlying geology, perform the necessary technology and engineering assessments, and arrange the logistics of exploration and development projects before a company can determine if a lease contains commercial quantities of oil and natural gas. There's no guarantee that all leases will eventually be productive. In the meantime, the US benefits significantly from companies taking a chance by acquiring leases, in that the government receives large amounts from lease sale bonuses and annual rentals. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's discussion. We look forward to continuing our work together with DOI as you undertake this important review. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And now we'll have our 10-minute Q&A session with our industry experts and our Department of Interior leaders. So could I ask Frank and Eric and Wendy to all turn their cameras on? Thank you.
Great. This is Laura Davis again. I want to say thanks to you all. Appreciation again that you would take the time to join us this afternoon. And we're going to try and do the same kind of one by one, but have it be a little bit give and take as well. So I think it's tough to achieve in 10 minutes, but we're going to try again. And so I'll just start with Wendy. And you commented that the independent oil and gas producers are committed to improving environmental performance, and appreciate that. So I think specifically, if you could talk to us about best practices that we should be talking to you about or considering during our review that mitigate climate and other environmental impacts of oil and gas development, including methane reduction. I think a couple of folks have mentioned that, water contamination concerns. Can you just talk to us a little bit more specifically about best practices to inform our thinking as we're undertaking this review?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, I think a lot of considerations for environmental protection have been in place, both as, standards for the industry and within regulation at state and federal levels for a long time. And I think one of the challenges is they're ever increasing, and they're, they can sometimes be duplicative or conflicting, and they can be complicated to work through. So I think mostly when it comes to sitting down with these projects, it's really talking to these companies. They're doing amazing things, and their standard operating procedures often have these best practices woven within them. And we also work, collaboratively sometimes as companies to do stuff regionally. You've seen certainly a lot of programs in collaboration with API programs like the Environmental Partnership, where I think 100% of HPC companies are enrolled and actively working to progress best practices and share knowledge as well as see how we can work together to improve these numbers. We've also come together with groups such as the Groundwater Protection Council and some of these other organizations that focus on groundwater protection and what we can learn from each other and how we can do better.
Great. Thanks so much, Wendy. Amanda, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you so much. So Eric, appreciated hearing your comments. I guess I'll start with asking a question of NOIA. More and more I've talked to many of the companies within NOIA, and many of the majors have really committed themselves to some sort of climate goals around emissions, particularly in the timeframe of 2050. And in the context of this review and executive order, and really the need to address climate change, and even many of your members acknowledging that as well, what do you think the critical pieces of the review are here, particularly in the offshore environment, in which we can ensure that we're adequately sort of adapting to that new framework and ensuring that we see success in this arena of driving down emissions, as you stated, the sort of the continued production or your expectation or hope for that?
Yeah, thank you, Director. And it's a great question. And one thing I didn't mention, I was trying to get a lot of information in a short amount of time. I have a lot to talk about, but we recognize that the offshore does provide this benefit of having these low carbon barrels, but our industry is by no means done with that. We have an ESG program in our organization, and it serves as a learning and collaboration center. And we're seeing throughout the supply chain, not just the operators, but the companies that manage offshore service vessels, the companies that are out there doing the construction, the companies that are helping to put in place the subsea completions. And we're seeing across the board through the service and supply chain, that everybody's working together to become more efficient and reduce emissions. So our efforts through our industry are going to continue to try to get emissions down to the lowest level possible. But it's also important as you go through the process to recognize the benefits that we already know about. The Wood Mackenzie, they put together that research that show offshore as having lowest carbon barrels. If you look at the scale, the BOEM, I think, or Bessie put out the research that shows that 18 facilities taking up 9 city blocks produce 75% of the oil from the offshore region. That's 10% of US production. That's more than almost every state in Texas. So we're able to do a lot with a little and thereby keep emissions down based on our ability to use high-tech and innovative approaches to our operations to continue to drive emissions down. So it's something that's going to continue to evolve. But the great thing is we have the companies that are committed to evolving and doing better. And I think through the process, we want to work with you and have the conversation to talk about our best practices and our approaches to continuing to further reduce emissions.
Thank you.
Andy, you want to jump in?
Sure, Mr. Macchiarola, I appreciated what you said about your companies wanting to be part of the solution with us in reducing impacts. And you mentioned a hot off the presses 5-point plan. So I think we'd like to hear a little bit more about the types of suggestions you have for how we might help to reduce climate impacts, and also if that plan might, or you might want to include some recommendations on how we would account for climate costs and impacts.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. So the plan is really proposed for engagement with the Biden administration as you consider the nationally determined contribution for the Paris Agreement. It consists of 5 component parts. First is to drive innovation and technology. We see this as critical to being able to continue to meet the demands that Americans have and the world has for oil and gas. And so this is in low and zero carbon emission technologies such as CCUS, hydrogen, and other technologies. We think the government can play a very important role in being able to incentivize these new technologies. Secondly, is mitigating emissions in our own operations. We recognize as an industry, we can do more to address the risks of climate change. And so we take tangible steps in 3 spaces, 2 of which are in the upstream, on flaring, as well as on methane emissions. We support the direct federal regulation of methane, and we'll work with the Biden administration as they consider that. And then on the downstream, on refinery emissions, we recognize that there are areas that we can do work as an industry there. We support a price on carbon. This has been long debated within industry and within government, and we think it's the most impactful way to address the risks of climate change. We also support stronger consistency and transparency in climate reporting. So investors understand what companies are doing to address this important issue. And then finally, we recognize that we need to give consumers lower carbon choices. And so in the area of fuels, both on the transportation side, as well as on the natural gas side, we want to advance cleaner fuels through our industry to be able to provide the American people and the globe, people around the world, with choices that are lower carbon. And so that's the commitment that the industry is taking, announcing today. And we obviously look forward to working with the regulators and our partners in the government to continue our important collaboration together. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Frank, for giving us some more detail. We appreciate it. You kind of teased us just mentioning it. So we're over time, which was inevitable, but I want to have sort of, if we can, 1 minute from each of you to talk about something that's a really important priority for the Biden administration. And that's how we can all work together to address orphaned and idled wells and abandoned mine lines reclamation. We see that as a real opportunity to put people to work in communities where all of your companies do work. So if you could just sort of give us a thumbnail before we go, because that's, as I said, that's a really big priority for us. And we're looking at the programs we have in place and what else we might need to be able to really go big on that. And just jump in, whoever wants to go first.
Go.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think, where idle and orphan wells can, provide an opportunity for additional jobs and, things like that. I think that's wonderful. The good news is on federal lands, the number of orphan wells that we're having to deal with is very small. The Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, who has a lot of expertise on this issue, recently issued a report, and they've done many over the years, where they talked about these challenges and what states are looking for as far as assistance. And they also noted that of the 50,000 plus orphaned wells out there, over 50,000 are really on state and private lands. And so I think the BLM actually just re-upped their idle well programs. I think they are now reviewing every year 20% to make sure every year their idle well inventory is getting reduced, which is wonderful. And it seems to be effective if you look at the statistics that you see in that IOGCC report.
Right. Yep, you're right about the vast majority of them being not on federal lands. Eric, you're going to jump in?
Yeah, I mentioned the Rig Sarif program, and we have members who are in the research side of the house, and they're looking at these facilities in terms of repurposing them to really advance these emerging technologies such as hydrogen, aquaculture, synthetic fuels. There's a lot happening in this space. A lot of it falls under DOE, but in working in partnership with Interior, we might be able to make sure that we maintain these flourishing marine ecosystems, but also find ways to create a technology and innovation hub through this infrastructure, because it can be used in ways that we may not have thought of in driving us towards some of these low carbon solutions that are being really talked about a lot, and that can become commercial if we have the best opportunity for RD&D, and that could come through the offshore sector by using some of these old structures.
Thank you. Frank, I see Connie's appeared, so she's telling us we have to wrap up, but I want to hear from you.
Sure. Sure. Thanks for the question. I would just add our membership looks forward to working with the department. As Wendy noted, this is primarily a state and private land issue, as most of the abandoned wells are on state and private lands, but with 300 approximately on federal lands, and with it being a priority of both industry and the Biden administration, we would look forward to the opportunity to work with you on this. I would add that this is also a component of that part of that plan that I described in terms of mitigating emissions within our own operations. So thank you for the question.
Well, that's great. And I just want to be clear that we here in the administration don't want to limit ourselves to thinking that our partnership would be limited to federal lands on this. So just want to be clear on that. And for us, it's a really an important component of how we look at building back better. So thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, I'm going to say this every time. I feel like the time is too short, but you were really kind to share so much time with us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you to our industry experts. And now we will return you back to the audience and welcome our next group of experts. That will be our environmental experts. So I will welcome Natalie Eddy, the interim field team manager and Colorado and New Mexico field advocate for Earthworks, Michael Levine, senior Arctic fellow from the Ocean Conservancy, and Sharon Buccino, the senior director for the land division for Natural Resources Defense Council. And so I'll turn it over to you now, Natalie.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks so much for this opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natalie Eddy. I'm a field advocate with Earthworks. I work in New Mexico and Colorado. So for over 30 years, Earthworks has fought to protect communities and the environment from the adverse impacts of extraction while promoting sustainable solutions. Earthworks does something unique. In response to community concerns, we take an optical gas imaging instrument, a state-of-the-art lens and camera, into the oil and gas fields to document oil and gas pollution that's otherwise invisible to the naked eye. To use this gas-seeking instrument, Earthworks staff undergo the same training and certification process as regulators and oil and gas workers. This optical gas imaging technology detects and documents both methane gas, which we know is 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide in warming the atmosphere, and also volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which harm health and include carcinogens. So what are we documenting in Pennsylvania, Texas, Colorado, New Mexico? Oil and gas pollution, every day, everywhere, and ongoing. Honestly, these investigations in the field can be tough with long days and remote locations, but finding oil and gas pollution is easy, way too easy. So this is true for big and small operators, big and small sites, new and old sites. Basically, significant pollution events are business as usual in the oil and gas fields. Business as usual means climate disaster. That's why we're counting on the Biden administration to stop oil and gas extraction on public lands and lead our country on a managed transition away from fossil fuels towards a just, clean energy future. So in the last 3 years, across 4 oil and gas states, Earthworks has made nearly 2,000 site visits, filing over 400 complaints to state regulators. Today, I'm only showing 3 sites out of hundreds where we've documented oil and gas pollution in New Mexico, but these examples illustrate the patterns we consistently find in oil and gas fields, including on our public lands. So we'll start in the New Mexico Permian. It's the slide we're looking at now, currently one of the most productive oil and gas basins in the world. Given the projected pollution from the Permian Basin, it is quite literally a global climate bomb that will lead us to catastrophe if we fail to adjust our trajectory away from fossil fuels. So this first site we see on the slide is operated by Casa Operating. This is on public lands just a few miles south of Carlsbad. This site sits immediately across from a residential home. You're seeing the pollution. What you're seeing here is the result of venting from a tank battery or storage unit. So this venting pollution is common. This pollution harms the community, impacts air quality near Carlsbad Caverns National Park, and worsens climate. Next slide, please. So the next site on the top, we're still down in the Permian, is the Cimarex Da Vinci Site 7, also on federal public lands. It's directly east of the caverns. And what we see here is an unlit flare. When flares are functioning properly, they burn off or combust emissions and reduce the pollution that otherwise would be released into the air. However, in practice, with each round of field work, we find many unlit and malfunctioning flares in the Permian. We're not certain if this is due to particular conditions in Texas and New Mexico, or if industry is choosing not to prioritize relighting flares. Regardless of the reason, pollution is just gushing out into the atmosphere at these sites where flares are regularly left unlit. And this last site in the bottom is in the San Juan Basin, so the other corner of New Mexico, in the Chaco Canyon area. This site's on public lands and operated by Encana, and now DJR. Similar to what we find in the Permian, we find chronic oil and gas pollution, often at repeat sites, impacting nearby Navajo communities, schools, and traditional uses of native lands. Just 2 weeks ago, we found at least half a dozen tank batteries in the Chaco Canyon area, venting emissions with odors carrying far off site. Again, what you can see here can be found on public lands across the United States. So in conclusion, what do we know? First, we know that pollution from existing oil and gas facilities on public lands is already harming health and climate. This pollution is disproportionately impacting poor and marginalized communities in places like the San Juan and Permian basins in New Mexico. Second, our field work and our complaint findings demonstrate that existing rules to limit air pollution are failing communities and failing our climate. That is why Earthworks has also asked the Environmental Protection Agency to use the full power of the Clean Air Act to cut methane pollution from oil and gas by 65% by 2025. But if this administration is really serious about protecting health and slowing the climate crisis, then we must stop permitting the continued expansion of oil and gas. Secretary Haaland, who's been out with Earthworks in the field documenting oil and gas pollution, and President Biden should permanently halt all new oil and gas extraction on public lands and take a bold step toward protecting our climate and the future of generations to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie. I will now turn it over to Michael Levine, Senior Arctic Fellow from the Ocean Conservancy. Please turn your camera on, Michael.
Thank you, Connie. I am speaking to you today from the unceded and ancestral territory of the Tlingit and Akwaan, or still snowy Juneau, Alaska. For those not familiar with it, Ocean Conservancy, under several different names, has been working for nearly 50 years to effectuate science-based, inclusive solutions to the most pressing problems facing ocean ecosystems. We do this by working programmatically on issues like climate change, fisheries, and plastics, and geographically in regions like the Gulf of Mexico and Arctic. My comments will focus on the need for reform in the management of offshore oil and gas. I want to start, though, by expressing my sincere gratitude on behalf of Ocean Conservancy to the Biden-Harris administration and to Secretary Haaland for this session, for listening to diverse voices, and for working toward consultation with sovereign tribal governments. Also, it's important to put this conversation in a larger context. There is a clear need to take action now to expedite just transition from fossil fuels to renewable sources of energy. For extraction from federal lands and waters, that means that we need to recognize explicitly that we are working toward ending fossil fuel extraction in the future and to identify a path to get there equitably. Pausing leasing now to allow for a full review is clearly a step in the right direction. It's also worth noting that this forum is scheduled between the anniversaries of two of the three biggest offshore oil disasters in American history. The Exxon Valdez ran aground on March 24th, 1989, and the Deepwater Horizon exploded and sank on April 10th, 2010. Now, more than 10 years after the Deepwater Horizon, we should be doing all we can to prevent another such tragedy. Unfortunately, we've wasted the past 4 years going in the wrong direction, as the previous administration tried unwisely, unnecessarily, and ultimately unsuccessfully to expand offshore leasing, while it pushed for extraction in places like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and rolled back important safety rules. In the ocean in my state, Alaska, the Trump administration proposed opening all but one of the 15 OCS planning areas. Many of these areas are home to iconic wildlife, productive fisheries, and communities that have relied on and been stewards of healthy ocean for millennia. And as Nicole stated earlier, these ocean ecosystems are dramatically changing as a result of climate change. The proposal from the Trump administration was so extreme that tribes, the fishing industry, the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, and congressional delegation opposed leasing in most of those areas. In two of the others, the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas, there have been two big boom and bust cycles in which companies have spent billions of dollars purchasing leases and drilling exploration wells, creating risk and controversy only to come up dry and leave. Moving forward, we must stop the backward slide from the Trump administration and take aggressive action to address climate change and the risks from offshore oil and gas activities. To do so, we offer 3 recommendations. First, the government must think about all of this through the lens of the need to expedite a just transition to prevent catastrophic impacts from climate change. In planning for and implementing this just transition, the government must include tribes as true partners and must find ways to work collaboratively with Indigenous people, coastal communities, and others. It also must address the disproportionate impact on disadvantaged communities and include all uses of fossil fuels, including energy use and the production of petrochemicals, which are the building blocks for plastics and fertilizer. The Department of the Interior should reform the regulations governing offshore oil and gas operations. These regulations are squarely within DOI's control, and the agency has wide latitude to update them, consistent with the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. OXLA was revised to its current form in 1978. The regulations implementing it were finalized the following year, and the rules governing planning and leasing have not been updated in any substantive way since. They are clearly outdated, and a holistic update would change the rent and royalty provisions to account for pollution externalities, change the interpretation of the 30-day window for approval of exploration plans, include Indigenous knowledge on equal footing with Western science, and rethink area-wide leasing and the way in which the agency ensures that it receives fair value for public resources. It's also important to stop the rollback of the Arctic-specific safety and preparedness regulations. These common sense rules should remain in place. Third, the agency can go a long way by changing its regulations, but congressional action is needed. The administration should work with tribes and leaders in Congress to introduce comprehensive reform legislation. Unlike after the Santa Barbara and Exxon Valdez spills, Congress did nothing of substance to address the myriad issues made apparent by the Deepwater Horizon tragedy. It's well past time to fix that. Among other issues, new legislation would explicitly recognize the need for just transition, prioritize ocean health rather than extraction, require proven response capacity, update financial responsibilities for spills, and ensure that response capacity and training is available for coastal communities. There are more details about the need for changes in regulation and the law in published academic articles and in the report from the National Commission on the Deepwater Horizon and Offshore Drilling. Thank you for having me at this session, and I'll gladly answer questions when the time comes.
Thank you, Michael. And now I'll turn it over to Sharon Buccino, the Senior Director of the Land Division for NRDC.
Thank you. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. My name is Sharon Buccino. I direct the Lands Division at the Natural Resources Defense Council. While I come before you as a lawyer representing NRDC, I also come as a mother of 2 daughters. Like any mother, I want a vibrant and equitable future for my children. The decisions you are poised to make regarding the nation's federal fossil fuel reserves will determine my daughter's future. Unless we act now, the increased death and disease, increased floods, increased drought, increased wildfires we are experiencing now will only get worse as my daughters grow older. I offer the following suggestions to help manage the federal oil and gas that our public lands and water hold in a way that solves catastrophic climate change, rather than fuels it. First, stop new oil and gas leasing. Let me be very clear today. The world does have a carbon budget. It's finite and it's running out, and we need a rapid transition to net zero. Although I strongly agree with these words, they are not mine. The CEO of BP, Bernard Looney, said them last February. The 2018 IPCC report emphasized the importance of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius because of the devastating consequences if we do not. Limiting global warming requires adhering to a carbon budget that is rapidly being depleted. We cannot afford to tap new oil and gas reserves and stay within our carbon budget. Many models indicate a steep, sustained, and permanent drop in oil and gas demand. Forthcoming NRDC modeling indicates just how dramatic these changes will be. US production, absent significant reductions, will seriously outstrip US demand after 2030. My first slide illustrates this with the yellow area showing supply and the dotted line showing the dramatic reduction in demand consistent with achieving a 1.5 degree scenario. Next slide, please. Public interest standards of existing law justify a halt to new leases, both onshore and offshore. Even lands managed for multiple use, like the 700 million acres that hold federal oil, gas, and coal reserves, cannot be used in ways that deny their benefits to future generations. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act, FLPMA, requires that the Bureau of Land Management manage the public's lands so they are, and I quote, utilized in the combination that will best meet the present and future needs of the American people. FLPMA defines multiple use as harmonious and coordinated management of various use resources without permanent impairment of the productivity of the land and the quality of the environment. Leasing that leads to catastrophic climate change does not meet this standard. OXLA, the Outer Continental Shelf Leasing Act, includes comparable language. Nothing in our public laws requires leasing. The Mineral Leasing Act authorizes the Secretary of the Interior to lease oil, gas, and coal in her discretion. Given what we know about the contribution of federal fossil fuels to catastrophic climate change, I would argue that it is an abuse of this discretion to issue new leases. Ending new federal leasing is not about turning off the flow of oil and gas. Oil and gas companies currently have 26 million acres of public lands under lease. Only half of these are currently in production. My second slide illustrates what this looks like across the West. The red areas are leases In production, the yellow areas are leases held by industry that are not currently being drilled. There is plenty of drilling that can occur without new leases. Next slide, please. A similar situation exists offshore. Oil and gas producers lease 12 million acres of federally managed oceans, but only 20% of the acreage currently has any drilling. The area in blue on this slide that is not green is the area that is leased but not in production. Whether to issue new oil and gas leases is about where we invest going forward. There are jobs in reclaiming abandoned mines and wells. There are jobs in a civilian climate corps. There are jobs in protecting and restoring nature, and there are jobs in clean energy. Next slide, and final slide. These are the investments that are going to pay off for our children. My final slide illustrates the job growth in clean energy compared to the nationwide employment. In my written testimony, I also highlight the critical role that the National Environmental Policy Act has in making decisions about federal oil and gas. Like FLPMA, NEPA speaks to sustainability and the imperative to take into account long-term needs. NEPA provides that it is the continuing duty of the federal government, and I quote, to fulfill the responsibilities of each generation as trustee of the environment for succeeding generations. Too often, the Interior Department has failed to satisfy its duty. As a nation, we have failed to protect large segments of the population from the impacts of drilling, transporting, and processing federal fossil fuels. NEPA requires an analysis of disproportionate impacts. In conducting such analysis, the Interior Department should consider the impacts of both the upstream and downstream emissions resulting from its decisions. Courts have repeatedly held that NEPA requires this. Thank you for addressing these critical issues and the opportunity to speak at today's forum. I have a written statement that provides more detail on these issues, and I will ask that it be included in the record. Thank you.
Sharon. Now we'll have a 10-minute Q&A session with our panelists and interior leaders. Please turn your cameras on, Michael, Sharon, and Natalie, and you can begin.
Great, thanks, Connie, and thanks everybody from the panel. And you've been watching, you know how this is going to go. We're going to ask a couple questions and try and facilitate a dialogue. So I'm going to start with Natalie, and really thank you for your comments. I appreciate them and the visuals. So in addition to methane emissions, are there other climate and environmental impacts from oil and gas development in communities that we can factor into this comprehensive review? Do you have recommendations as well for how we could account for those impacts through, policy, fiscal policy, regulation, other actions?
Great, thanks so much for the question. I think as I mentioned in the presentation, and part of what we document when we're in the field is both methane as well as volatile organic compounds. We know that many of these VOCs are known carcinogens and cancer causing. So that definitely should be something that we take into account in terms of, I would ask that the agency consider going forward. That's certainly a large part of what communities are most concerned with, particularly living in close proximity and knowing just how far VOCs are able to travel and impact communities who are exposed in a chronic, ongoing 24/7 manner.
Thanks. Any other specifics you want to suggest for us? Or remember, you have written opportunity too, so I don't want to press you.
Absolutely, no, and happy to share more, but especially considering a big part of the, I think what could be helpful going forward would be air monitoring, and that's something that, thinking about what's going on in the New Mexico Permian as well as in the San Juan Basin, the absence of that information leaves out a lot of questions that community members are waiting for answers on. And that unknown can be a really uncomfortable and scary place for families to be when they're seeing and experiencing health impacts that they believe to be caused by adjacent and oil and gas facilities, but without more regular and more appropriately placed air monitoring, there's just a lot more questions than answers, with huge implications for those families living on the front lines.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Amanda, you want to come in?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everyone, for your great presentations. I guess I'll ask Michael specifically, thank you for the three clear points that you made, one of which was that the Department of Interior should update the implementing regulations for OXLA. And I'm curious about what you see as sort of the key considerations that we should think about in the context of review for such an update.
Yes, thank you for the question, Director Lefton. And I will note that this is an issue that my colleague Andrew Hartzig and I have delved into deeply and have a couple of law review articles, which we will gladly share with you about. It's important that these regulations, especially the planning and leasing and many of the exploration regulations, haven't changed in 40 years. And so they haven't kept up with changes in technology, with the push to deeper and more remote places. And they haven't kept up with changes in policy either. They haven't kept up with the need to address climate change, the need to include indigenous knowledge, and they haven't kept up with what we know now about the ocean that we didn't know 40 years ago. And since these rules are outdated, they deserve a holistic review to update, to reflect technology, to reflect policy, and also to reflect a better capturing of fair value for public resources. All of these things are within the Department of the Interior's purview, are consistent with the latitude given the agency under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act, and are well past due.
Thank you for that. I look forward to seeing those articles, Michael.
I'm gonna ask Nate to jump in.
Question of Sharon. Sharon, you talked a lot about recommendations on leasing, but as you noted, and we've heard from prior panelists, there are numerous leases in place that will continue to be developed, including a lot of permits to be coming. So I'd like to know if you have some specific recommendations on how we might manage permitting in your view as well.
Sure, thank you. So the term net zero has come up a few times already, and I would encourage the department to apply a net zero frame to permitting. In some cases, this may dictate not leasing, but in other cases, it really involves mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions from drilling, which we heard addressed in the last panel, the industry panel. The Mineral Leasing Act, FLPMA, and NEPA all provide authority to require such mitigation. And I would suggest that it doesn't necessarily need a rule from the Bureau of Land Management. I think the agency can use conditions of approval attached to drilling permits to secure the mitigation necessary. These conditions are standard practice, and they should address climate impacts as well as other impacts such as toxic air pollution, water contamination, and discharge of oil and gas wastewater as well.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Sharon. I'm going to ask the big question again. And of course, we're behind, but we remain behind, and we started behind for this panel. So what we would like to do, and again, we're trying to take a comprehensive look and not imagine that all the solutions lie within the Interior Department. There's a lot of legislation that's sort of rolling around right now in terms of addressing some of the issues that you have all raised for certain authorities for oil and gas permitting and leasing at the department. So could you just, each of you, tell us sort of one area that you think would be useful for us if we're going to do some partnering on legislation to address some of these issues? What is that? What would be your top answer?
Well, I'll start since I just finished. If I had to pick one, I would say it's bonding, but even more importantly, the reclamation piece. And I know you are only talking about oil and gas today, but I'm reminded in looking at the statute that governs coal leasing, we were only ever supposed to actually allow coal mining where reclamation was possible. And for both coal and oil and gas, we owe it to the communities where this activity has happened to do that reclamation. And it's also a source of technical and good jobs. So that would be what I would identify.
Thanks. Michael, Natalie, who wants to jump in?
I'll jump in, and of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say that your priority should be the ocean. And of course, there's the need for legislation broad scale on just transition and climate change specific to these issues. If we could make one change in the legislation about offshore oil and gas, it would be to prioritize the health and viability of ocean ecosystems rather than the way it's stated now, the priority for extraction. And that would include requiring proven response capacity and, as Sharon said, financial accountability for eventual spills.
Awesome, thank you. Natalie?
Thanks so much, and great to join this panel with Sharon and Mike. I mean, I think I'll reiterate the call and our support for a permanent halt to expansion of oil and gas on public lands for two reasons that are converging. One is the more we learn about climate change, the more urgent we know and the more action we know is required. And at the same time, the more we learn about the actual emissions, measured emissions, methane and VOCs coming from oil and gas facilities, the more those numbers go up. So we are heavily reliant on self-reported numbers right now. And the more there are independent studies, the more urgent our action is the more urgent action is needed. And to bridge that gap between our climate ambition and appropriate response to the urgent situation we're in, and the reality of these unfettered, uncontrolled oil and gas pollution that will continue. There's no amount of regulation that will stop this harm.
Great. I want to say thanks to all of you very much. I know it's a lot to ask you to take a chunk out of your day. I know you're really busy, and want to appreciate again the specificity that you brought to the conversation and the recommendations and ideas for us.
Thank you. Thank you for this, for that presentation and for those comments. Our next panel will be, our next group of experts will be labor experts. And I will ask Sean McGarvey, the president of the North American Building Trades Union, and Wendell Hibden, the director of energy and infrastructure for the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters, to join us. But first we'll ask Sean to give us his remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for holding this public forum on federal oil and gas program. This topic is never an easy discussion as it includes several passionate constituencies, many of whom are here today. Organized labor in my organization, North America's Building Trades Unions, is one of those constituencies. It goes without saying that the conversation today is just the start. Thank you to Secretary Haaland, BOEM Director Lefton, and President Biden for facilitating this conversation. My name is Sean McGarvey, and I'm the president of North America's Building Trades Unions, which is composed of 14 affiliated national and international construction unions. We have 291 state and local building and construction trades councils throughout the United States, which together represent more than 3 million men and women employed in the construction industry. Roughly 50% of our membership is employed in the energy sector one time during the year. Through our relationships with the oil and gas industry, NAB2 constructs new combined cycle power plants powered by American natural gas. We construct pipelines and energy infrastructure. We also work in the refining industry, and we build and maintain petrochemical facilities. To put a finer point on this, the construction of a petrochemical project can employ upwards of 8,000 craft men and women on site. Those jobs and thousands more would not exist if it were not for domestic oil and gas production. NAB2 has a long history of support for projects and industries which employ our members. Our unions do not represent climate deniers. and we support environmentally responsible energy policies that contain strong worker protections and allow for middle-class, family-sustaining jobs. We are confident that our members possess the skills and ingenuity to meet the demands of the growing industry and economy, while being responsible environmental stewards. However, our jobs are under threat from anti-development activists, advocates, and we find ourselves fighting for permits necessary to begin construction on energy-related infrastructure projects. Our membership rarely neglects the opportunity to advocate for their jobs in front of agency officials or during permitting hearings. So thank you again for today's opportunity. Government policy directly impacts the industry's decision-making related to natural gas development, pipeline projects, export facilities, and advanced manufacturing. Make no mistake, NAB2 members build the factories and maintain the production lines which produce consumer products that enter facilities as oil or gas feedstock. We welcome the conversations related to a clear federal energy policy and attendant regulations. However, we must ask if an outright ban on federal leases is the best first step without addressing the downstream job impacts that provide employment opportunities. The administration is laser focused on the creation of good paying union energy jobs. We must not discount the ones that already exist. To that end, we frequently partner with our friends in the oil and gas sector to train members and create pathways into the middle class. NAB2's affiliates boast over 1,900 training centers in North America. Our training is world-renowned, and it is a cornerstone for safety and productivity on all construction sites, union or non-union. Coupled with our nationwide efforts to expand apprenticeship and apprenticeship readiness programs, we're increasing job access for communities of color, women, veterans, and formerly incarcerated that are often an afterthought in many industries. We are encouraged by the conversations today and look forward to finding pathways forward that support environmental stewardship and set the U.S. on a realistic path forward to meet our mid-century climate goals while also creating good-paying, family-sustaining, middle-class jobs. I thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Wendell Hibden, the Director of Energy and Infrastructure for the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters.
Thank you, Connie. Just like Sean said, President McGarvey, we do appreciate the opportunity to have a seat at the table in these important discussions. Once again, my name is Wendell Hibden. I'm the Director of Energy and Infrastructure for the United Association of Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. And we just want to start by saying the UA we're basically disappointed that the freeze on public fracking has happened, but we are extremely happy with President Biden's support of fracking on private land to continue producing this energy. Excuse me. Most people don't realize, but fracking actually helped pull us out of the last recession under President Obama's administration and give us an opportunity to get work going for working people and turn things around. Right now, as Sean mentioned earlier, we have tens of thousands of jobs going on in the Pittsburgh area due to the Marcellus Shale fracking up there. And we want to go on record as saying, as Sean said earlier, the UA itself, we're not climate change deniers. We believe climate change is real. We know it's happening. We believe it has to be addressed. But on the other side of that coin, we believe the solutions should also be real. They should be attainable and realistic. Natural gas burns 50% cleaner than coal does. We realize that. We're on our way to cleaning things up. But we do realize that methane leaks is a problem with natural gas, and it needs to be addressed immediately. To the end of using natural gas, we also believe that carbon capture needs to be tested. It needs to be, demonstration plants need to be created and probably government funded to make sure we can get them going and see if it's feasible. And if it is, we have a moral obligation, we feel like, to the American people, for American jobs and the communities to support these industries, to make sure that we can continue to move forward. We've always said the energy sources should be diversified, much like we tell people to diversify their 401k so they don't take a catastrophic hit. Solar, wind, nuclear, natural gas, hydro, possibly coal if CCSU carbon capture and utilization and sequestration proves to be viable. Rolling brownouts and blackouts are a threat to the health and safety of Americans. And not only that, a stable grid provides, for my belief is a stable energy grid is a matter of national security. I believe that we can't afford to have rolling brownouts and blackouts. When it comes to petroleum, there's 290,000 vehicles on the road right now, and 2% of those are electric. And there's tens of millions of people that we know of that are driving vehicles that worth $2,000 to $3,000 just trying to get to and from work, working paycheck to paycheck, just trying to make ends meet. They're not going to have the money to invest in electric vehicles. I believe down the road we'll get there. I believe jobs are going to get better, but we're not there now. And it needs to be addressed. When it comes to shuttering refineries, we just can't do it. I mean, all we're going to be doing is shipping jobs overseas and having them send petroleum back. We can't afford to do that. What we're saying is good paying jobs for Americans should be considered with any type of climate plan. We should support our economy and our Americans first. Basically, that's all I got to say. I'll cede any time left to Sean if he wants it. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendell. So we'll now have our 10-minute Q&A discussion with our panelists and our interior leaders. So Wendell and Sean, if you could both turn your cameras back on. Thank you.
I'm trying. There we go.
Great, there you are. Well, thanks to both of you. And I'm going to do this a little bit differently because we've got two of you. So I just want to start with throwing a question out. Number one, thank President McGarvey and Mr. Hibdon for taking the time to be with us today. And I wanted to start with acknowledging, I think President McGarvey, you said this is our sort of first of many conversations, and Mr. Hibdon said, we're having a seat at the table, and just wanted to acknowledge that and say that for sure, we want to keep talking. And I think for us, it would be really, we could talk a little bit about it here and have it kind of be the entry point to further conversation of, as we're going through this comprehensive review and looking at the decision-making processes associated with leasing and permitting and thinking about, the issues that we're trying to address, whether it's restoring balance in terms of how we manage production and leasing on public lands and waters, being sure to create those good American jobs that we all believe in and that this administration is all about as well, which you both mentioned, and then sort of how we're aligning ourselves with our sort of climate conservation jobs and clean energy goals. It's a big charge, but we're asked to do it under this executive order with our partners. So that's a big question, but I wanted to see if either, hopefully both of you wanted to sort of take it on and just talk a little bit more about recommendations for us about how we be sure we're fully engaged with you and learning from you and understanding the specific things we need to be taking into consideration. I think we're all trying to get to the same place, but it's really complicated, as both of you noted.
Well, I'll take a crack at it, and I will say this, that we have all been witnesses to a situation in this country that I personally never thought I would see, where the division amongst and between Americans is at a point where people can't even talk to each other. That culminated, with violence in our streets and in our capital. And I believe, because it's actually the business that I'm in, that a whole lot of what's going on in this country, the unhappiness, the anger, is based on economic insecurity, okay, of 40 to 50 years of no real wage growth, of, corporate America not always having the workforce as the first consideration. And now we have a president and administration and a Congress and a fabulous cabinet who has the opportunity to deal with some of these issues. But but they're the underlying ones. And you know, we're now a facts-based government, which is great news. And the first fact we have to recognize is that the last bastions of middle-class family-sustaining employment in this country, for the most part, are in gas and oil, petrochemical, and power generation. All right. The renewable industry, as it stands today, is not a middle-class family-sustaining industry. Now, we believe that this administration is focused on that also, and that there are things that can be done regulatorily and legislatively to fix some of that, but that's the reality. So when we talk about a transition and a just transition, you know, from our perspective in the construction industry and the building trades, what we're talking about is a horizontal move economically. When lots of folks talk about, you know, all these opportunities in the renewable industry, and I believe they're there, and I also believe that, you know, retrofitting commercial office stock and housing stock in this country creates wonderful opportunities for domestic manufacturing and employment. But you can't start with asking people to take a 50% pay cut and think they're going to be able to continue to pay their mortgage and put food on the table. And that drives a lot of anxiety, as it would for any of us in this call, I think. So I think that is kind of the lens as we move towards this clean energy future. And the policymakers that are going to help the president chart this course need to view it from. That's real. That exists, just like climate change exists. And that is something that people are going to have to feel comfortable with as these decisions on policy that affect people's livelihoods are made. And I'll finish just saying this. My members, the men and women that I have the privilege to represent, I can't always have a constructive conversation with them about the opportunities and what's coming and how good it's going to be, because they have watched in their own family and in their own community their grandparents take it on the chin, their parents not get the kind of support, and were affected by the growth of the worldwide economy and the loss of domestic manufacturing. And they, for the most part, were good citizens and said, hey, this is for the good of the country. It's going to work out. It's going to work out. Well, it never worked out for them. So the membership that I represent, you know, care greatly about this country, care greatly about the climate, care greatly about our lands, care about their kids and their grandkids. But they're like, no, not this time, Sean. We really don't want to hear it, Sean. You know, this is like betting horses. Okay. You look at past performance, and this country's past performance on this issue, a changing technology and policy that greatly affects people's ability to maintain their place in the middle class. They don't want to hear it. So we got to be really thoughtful. We have to have the right policies in place, and we have to do a transition, as we say, that is just, that gives people the opportunity to move horizontally and not have to take a step backwards.
Great, thank you. That's a big challenge for us. Of course, that's the commitment of this administration, but I appreciate what you're saying. Mr. Hibden?
Yeah, Laura, basically, just tagging on to what Sean said there, I think to tie in wages and labor standards to the permits is a huge issue, to make sure that the people are protected, that if it does open up, do work these jobs, make sure that they're protected with their wages and their labor standards.
Yeah, I think that's really relevant to some of the things we've already talked about. The work that we're trying to do to really push forward offshore wind and take those important considerations into account. As well as, and this might be a little bit trickier, some of the orphan well and abandoned mine land work out on the landscape. Again, I think it's our challenge to kind of knit this together and figure out a way to make that horizontal move and have the right standards. I mean, I know we're all trying to head in the same direction, but it's good to have this conversation here in a forum for everybody to hear.
Undoubtedly, and if I could just, Laura, just jump in and say that most certainly, I think we share the same end goal, which is family supporting and good paying union jobs in this country. And, to that end, as we think about how we move forward in this review and otherwise, what is it that we can be doing to better partner with your unions and your constituencies? Wendell, you specifically mentioned putting something within permits and conditions, but I'm curious, we know that we want to create jobs through offshore wind. We know we have opportunities with orphaned and abandoned wells. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that and how we can create at least those jobs that we know are good paying jobs to do that lateral transition, as you're saying, Sean, or otherwise.
Well, that's actually, a great segue to a point I want to make. We have been engaged for the last couple of years with the financiers of offshore wind, mostly from Europe, the developers of offshore wind, and we have been successful in engaging in, potentially $60 billion of offshore wind to be done at family sustaining middle-class wages and benefits through our collective bargaining agreements, and creating ladders of opportunity for lots of folks to enter the construction industry through those investments, through our training programs and our apprenticeship readiness programs. And that just tells me that the industry onshore could do the same thing, because the industry onshore has been subsidized by our federal tax dollars, for decades now, from 26 to 30%. And, we got a new tax credit on offshore wind that came in the omnibus at the end of the year. So you got the production tax credit, investment tax credit, offshore tax credit. None of them have labor standards. So it's no longer a fledgling technology that we're trying to birth it, get it out of the crib, see if it can crawl. Hopefully it's going to walk and support it. It's now a profit center. Okay. It is now a situation that private equity and other groups are saying, let's build X megawatt wind farm, and then we'll get a power purchase agreement, and then we'll spin it off. And oh, by the way, we'll take advantage of the federal subsidy that cuts our costs 25 to 30%, and then we'll get a cut from the states because they want to green up some stuff too. We're not against that. What we're against is that they're taking the money, part of the money that they're making that rightfully belongs to the workers who are toiling in this industries, and putting into their pocket or passing on to their shareholders. I'm a capitalist. The building trades are capitalists. Okay. We want everybody to make money, starting with our own members. But we want every American to have the opportunity to be a middle-class family and in their chosen profession. We just don't want to be disadvantaged. And quite honestly, we're competing, we have wage and benefit packages that are $50, $60, $70 an hour. And we're competing against, our contractors are attempting to compete against people that are paying their people, $15, $16, $17, $18, $20 an hour without any benefits. It's impossible for us to do it. And we'll never be successful as long as the federal government's going to subsidize it and not have strings attached to it to say you're going to pay middle-class family sustaining wages on this work if you're going to use taxpayer money to subsidize the cost through the Davis-Bacon Act. If we can get there, we're not afraid to compete with anybody, anywhere in this world. And we know we'll get our fair share. But, right now it's difficult because in the fossil fuel industry, the last part of the conversation is about cost. Okay. First, it's schedule, it's safety. It's about, do they have the skill sets? Can you ramp up? Can you do the workforce development? Can you do all those things? And then it's cost. In the renewable industry, the first and only conversation is how much it costs. And if somebody's making, $75,000 a year, probably not the right industry for you, because we can hire two people for $75,000 a year. We're not going to hire one yet. So we think that there's policies, and we're encouraged with President Biden and leaders in Congress recognizing this as we're going to make this next giant step. But that's the real signal that has to be sent to workers, not just my members in this country, that they're going to get a fair shake and treated fairly and get a chance to enjoy some of the fruits of their labor economically, and not just people that are, doing this for investments to turn profits to pad, their own personal economics.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And thank you, everyone on the panel. I appreciate your comments.
I'm going to say one last thing, if you don't mind, Connie. I know we're trying to transition. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to us about this. I also just want to acknowledge that we are the federal government and we do have some levers to address what you're talking about. And we just look forward to continuing this conversation with you guys. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Onshore as well as offshore, just to get.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Be safe.
Thank you.
And so now we'll move on to our next panel. I'm going to invite Maite Arce, the president and CEO of the Hispanic Access Foundation, Jackie Patterson, the director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program, and Dr. Beverly Wright, the executive director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. I will turn it over to Maite now, and you will have 5 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Haaland, and to the Department of Interior staff for inviting me to speak today. I am Maite Arce, CEO of Hispanic Access Foundation. Next slide. We provide a path for the development and rise of Latino leaders, elevating their voices where we are underrepresented. Next slide. We're not an environmental organization. We serve diverse audiences, including faith-based and community leaders, youth, and local groups on what matters most to them, including their health, financial empowerment, workforce, and conservation. Hispanic Access connects people to jobs, opportunities, partners, and we support communities in the building of their own narrative about their culture, their story, and their community. We convene multi-sector leadership for dialogue and problem solving because communities know what is best for themselves. Latinos are not only passionate about the outdoors, but are more concerned about climate change, pollution, and the impact of oil and gas drilling than the general public. Latino communities want to protect their health and where they live, work, play, worship, and go to school. There are things that the oil and gas industry does not consider. For example, most oil drilling primarily happens in Latino, Black, and Indigenous communities. One example is Los Angeles, the largest urban oil field in the nation with over 3,000 oil and gas wells. Latinos in other communities are often exposed to toxic emissions and spills, and our communities often live near offshore drilling, near the ports and refineries and other polluted areas. In the Inland Empire of California, where we work, 80% of the students attending school within a mile of oil and gas wells are non-white, and over 60% are Hispanic. These communities face health problems from contaminated air, but when community members ask for translation so that they can participate in oil and gas leasing review, the BLM said no, and that must change. We met with communities in Farmington, New Mexico, who share a complicated opinion on oil and gas. On the one hand, they rely on the jobs, very much rely on the jobs and that are supported by the industry, but they also must live with the negative impacts to their health and their environment, including thousands of abandoned oil and gas wells leaking toxic chemicals into the air and to the water. Next slide. Oil and gas development is worsening COVID-19. A report by the Alliance for Nurses and Healthy Environments states that air pollution from oil and gas increased asthma risk and severity of respiratory illnesses like COVID. Hispanic children are twice as likely to die from asthma as white children. Communities of color have higher COVID-19 hospitalization and death rates than white communities. We must take a new approach that prioritizes the physical, mental, and social well-being of our communities and creates a long-term solution that considers the future generations. The touchstone for any new BLM system must put people first and their health and the health of their communities first. Next slide. 82% of voters in the West think oil and gas development on public lands should be stopped or strictly limited. They want their representatives to emphasize conservation and recreation over energy development. 95% of Latino voters believe companies should be required to prevent leaks of pollutants, and 90% of all Westerners believe companies should be required to pay for the cleanup after drilling. Next slide. Latino voters, next slide, please. Latino voters support transitioning to 100% renewable energy over the next 10 to 15 years. Next slide. Latino voters support a 30 by 30 national goal. Next slide. Our approach at Hispanic Access Foundation is to take steps now that we know will bear fruit in the future. In addition to community engagement, we invest in research. Understanding our community's needs and their aspirations helps us to inform decision makers and stakeholders. These reports, available on our website, help lift the voices of those who have been overlooked. From our engagement and the data we know, Latinos highly prioritize clean air, clean water, protected public lands, and climate action, but disproportionately face barriers of access, pollution, and destruction of nature. We then build from our research and community insight to educate and inform policies for a more equitable future. And today that means supporting policies that reduce pollution and require companies to pay for the cost of developing on federal lands and waters. Next slide. Our initiatives connect Latinos to each other and provide access, capacity, and build power. So I leave you with these words. Oil and gas companies have already lost jobs and future prospects are grim. So for the communities, pivoting to recreation and other sustainable land use options is essential, and many places have already started. The transition from an extractive to a regenerative local economy must be just, redressing the past harms and creating new relationships for an equitable future for the community. Hispanic Access Foundation is a resource for that transition. We encourage you to count on us for the information and engagement to create an oil and gas system that puts people, their health, and the health of their communities first. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today.
Thank you, Maite. I will now turn it over to Jackie Patterson, the Director of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program.
Thank you for having me, and happy to make these remarks. I want to start really by saying that we collectively have to resist the myth of scarcity and embrace the reality of abundance. Our Earth was designed divinely, and the regenerative design of the Earth systems means that seasons regenerate with every season. The soil and the sun fosters growth and all the food that we need. The world is 2/3 water, which more than meets our needs, and the sun rises every day, literally like clockwork, and so on and so on. However, thanks to the perpetuation of the false narratives that have pitted people against each other and has given the false impression that it's not possible to have clean air, clean water, and health and economic wellness for all. The false narratives tell us that there is an inverse relationship between protecting the environment and opportunities to prosper, and that has led us to where we are today, specifically as it relates to the energy sector, with the wealthy few using a reckless extractive means to harness and process energy as they amass wealth and power and sacrifice the well-being of workers and of communities in so doing. So as we talk about it, our Fumes Across the Fence Line report, the Gasping for Air report that was published by the Clean Air Task Force found that ozone smog from natural gas industry pollution is associated with 750,000 summertime asthma attacks in children and 500,000 missed school days. Among adults, this pollution results in 2,000 asthma-related emergency room visits and 600 hospital admissions and 1.5 million reduced activity days. We also detail many other troubling facts, specifically with regard to the disproportionate impact of the oil and gas industry on African Americans. More than 1 million African Americans live within a half mile of existing oil and gas facilities, and the number is growing every year. As a result, many African American communities face an elevated risk of cancer due to air toxic emissions from this development. Over 1 million African Americans live in counties that face a cancer risk above EPA's level of concern for toxins emitted from these facilities. The air in many African American communities violates air quality standards for ozone smog, and as a result, we know that this increases during the summer ozone season. African American communities are burdened by 138,000 childhood asthma attacks and 101,000 lost days of school every single year. Approximately 13.4% of African American children have asthma, which is over 1.3 million children compared to 7.3% for white American children. And the death rate for African American children with asthma is 1 per 1 million, while for white American children, it is 1 per 10 million, so 10 times the rate. So the racial disparities among communities impacted by environmental pollution in the US is quite stark. With African American children exposed to 38% more polluted air than Caucasian American children, and they're more likely to live in fence-line communities than the average American. And so we see how this plays out in so many communities in terms of the oil and gas infrastructure, whether it's the proposed Atlantic Coast Pipeline that would have been along the North Carolina and Virginia and other places. In one of the places where it was slated to be, the overall cancer rate exceeds that for the state of North Carolina at 516 per 100,000 compared to other places, which is 70 per 100,000. And this is where this facility would have gone that would have raised those that toxic exposure. So there's so much in the way of these damaging and concerning both statistics at a national level, but stories at a local level. These are children, these are families, these are communities that are facing these exposures, whether it is the Los Angeles and the Inglewood oil field where they're facing a long history of oil drilling, which is causing extreme disparities in health and well-being of communities. In other areas in Los Angeles where we know the American Lung Association has shown that we have extremes in terms of the top 10 worst communities in terms of air pollution. Many of them are located in California because of the pollution from the oil and gas industry and otherwise. And most often these are Black and Latinx communities. Similarly with Louisiana and places like Delaware, where in these petrochemical corridors where the stories are just too many to tell. So as I wrap up, the 5 minutes goes fast, we know that we have to reform the energy and industrial sectors into cleaner, sustainable, and vibrant communities that work for the communities that live there. This means more than shifting to clean and renewable energy sources, but also giving local communities control over their energy sources and promoting local economic growth through stable employment opportunities. The only definite way to end extractive energy economy facilities is to reduce the amount of energy we need and to advocate for clean, renewable sources for communities, including solar and wind. And even those sources must be utilized responsibly. Again, as I wrap up specifically, we have to shift away from the combustible engine. We have to reform our buildings so that our buildings are built on regenerative design and biomimicry. We have to do it in a way that ensures high road jobs for sectors and workers that spoke before in transition, but we know it's possible. We have to shift from the myth of scarcity, as I said before, and embrace the reality of abundance. And in so doing, we can structure our society in a way that ensures wellness for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Beverly Wright, the Executive Director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'd like to begin with congratulations to Secretary Deborah Haaland on her appointment to lead the Department of the Interior. I want to express my gratitude to the Biden-Harris administration for making the achievement of environmental justice and equitable climate solutions a national priority. I see all of this as a long time coming. I appreciate being invited to this panel to address the federal oil and gas program. My name is Beverly Wright, and I'm the Executive Director of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. I co-founded the center nearly 30 years ago in 1992 in New Orleans, Louisiana. We partner with communities who are harmed by environmental racism and face serious climate threats in the Gulf Coast region. We provide interdisciplinary education and research, as well as strategic policy and legal assistance that support communities to effectively engage in governmental decisions affecting their health and wellness. We conduct worker training programs in 6 states that prepare unemployed and underemployed people to obtain state certification for environmental careers involving remediation, construction, disaster response, and restoration. I co-direct the HBCU Climate Change Consortium with Dr. Robert Bullitt at Texas Southern University, which prepares students at 32 HBCUs to contribute to climate solutions through scientific research that they conduct and present at the annual HBCU Climate Change Conference. More than 300 HBCU students attend this conference with leaders of community-based organizations, academicians, researchers, advocates, and practitioners in the field. I urge Secretary Haaland to undertake an environmental justice review of the federal oil and gas program in order to address the racial discrimination that is central to oil and gas operations. For more than 50 years, the oil and gas industry has dominated the Gulf Coast region to the detriment of Black communities engulfed in the massive amounts of toxic pollution from oil refining and manufacturing of plastics from oil and gas feedstocks. In the 2019 Toxic Release Inventory, the petroleum sectors report the release of 11 million pounds of pollution in 25 Louisiana parishes. Much of this pollution is released from multiple facilities located in close proximity to Black residents. These facilities release chemicals in the air that are scientifically known to cause cancer, as well as damage heart and lung functions, which make it difficult to breathe and cause premature death. Unfortunately, the health threat of toxic pollution is made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. A study by Harvard University Public Health researchers found that long-term exposure to PM 2.5, which are fine airborne particles released by sources that include the oil and gas industry, increases the risk of COVID-19 hospitalization and deaths. Black people are more exposed to PM 2.5 pollution at a rate that is 1.5 times greater than the pollution at large. Air pollution is not the only concern. We have reported on the massive amount of oil and gas waste from the BP oil drilling disaster being disposed in landfills next to Black communities. For example, 3 of the 5 landfills in Louisiana that receive this waste are located in Black neighborhoods. Less known oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico add to this racial inequality. We are deeply concerned about the greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas industry that contribute to the climate crisis. With each climate-induced disaster, Black and other communities of color suffer the most from stronger storms, increased flood events, sea level rise, and dangerous heat waves. Climate studies, including the National Climate Assessment, recognize that it is our communities who are disproportionately exposed to extreme weather and less likely than white communities to recover from them. Oil and gas drilling off the coast of Louisiana has demonstrably changed the US border as a result of the sprawling network of pipelines that transport the oil and gas inland. The massive land loss of Louisiana's coast removes natural defenses to storms, elevates sea level rise, and leaves entire communities, in particular Black and Indigenous communities, vulnerable to the destructive impacts of climate-induced disorders. The demand heard from Black communities from Louisiana's Cancer Alley to environmental agencies, public hearings taking place across America, is for a moratorium on pollution permits. A permanent moratorium is essential to ensuring environmental justice and mitigating climate change. This demand is answered by New Jersey lawmakers who recently passed a law to prevent pollution permits in overburdened communities, as well as by members of Congress who are working to pass the Environmental Justice for All Act, a bill that establishes a civil rights remedy for environmental racism. I have described the egregious secondary and cumulative impacts that spiral from oil and gas leases, which include poor health conditions in Black communities and the existential threat of climate change. I strongly recommend that both environmental racism and racial inequity of climate vulnerability be taken into account in the Department of Interior's review of the federal oil and gas program. Our survival depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. And now we'll have a 10-minute presentation with our equity experts and interior leaders. So Jackie and Dr. Wright and Matei, if you can turn your cameras on, please.
What would be really helpful to us, or I feel like we want to ask a big question to all of you and see if we can have a dialogue. I mean, we're here, of course, to talk about the comprehensive oil and gas review that we're undertaking at the Department of the Interior, and all of you have given us some really important feedback and specifics. But we also want to acknowledge we're going to need more, and we're in this really big department. So would like to ask sort of a big question and have some back and forth. So it's kind of throughout a review, and then when you think about decision-making processes in a broader department, and certainly in our oil and gas work going forward, post-review, the review will end. How can we more meaningfully engage with vulnerable and marginalized communities that are facing these disproportionate impacts from climate change and pollution? I feel like we are really determined to do better, but it may not be sort of the most active muscle sort of currently in the way that we do business. So just if I could just invite each of you to just kind of jump in and share with us and give us some recommendations and guidance on that. And we can go from there, but it feels like that's a really important thing for us to, like I said, it may not be the most active muscle. So your guidance and input would be really helpful.
Well, I want to just say something really quickly, but I really think that Jackie would probably have some real good ideas. So I'm just going to jump in before Jackie and say that as what I consider maybe the oldest person on this panel with the longest length of time working with the government, I can tell you what seemed to work back in the old days, and that is the forming of a FACA of some sort, which was with representatives from impacted communities in particular areas. And that kind of formal engagement with communities directly impacted will certainly work to get information directly to you. Our problem with that is that we certainly gave information, but we didn't get many solutions. So, you know, if you want to find a way to communicate with us, I believe that this particular process that already exists within the federal government being provided to communities from the Department of Interior would be most helpful. And I think that having discussions with other departments like EPA that started NEJAC and all of these other things, the interagency work groups, I think that not starting from scratch, keeping what works and what's good and moving from there is probably the best approach. That would be my suggestion.
Yes. I would give snaps to that. And I would say, I really think that kind of says it all, because those are kind of tried and true methodologies that Dr. Wright has actually experienced. So I think that's the best stuff.
Good, bad, and the ugly, all of it I have experienced.
And one of the things that I've been thinking about with this situation, especially even in the context, or maybe especially in the context of COVID-19, is as we've been, on one hand, COVID-19 has opened for us the ability for folks to engage in our trainings and meetings and so forth because of the virtual reality, because we have these training, when we did this equity and emergency management training, normally we would get maybe 60 people at the training from a whole region. And our first training, we had 300 people from Florida alone registered, 304 people. And it was because of that access. But at the same time, one of the things that we've been thinking about with this Justice 40 conversation is the folks who are not just on the margins, but who aren't even on the map. Like, how do we make sure that we are really reaching folks that are way, way out there? And on one hand, yes, like groups like the NAACP with 2,200 branches and chapters, can certainly be a facilitator. I would definitely point to church groups, because in some of those places, the only thing that's there might be a church. In terms of like an institution of any sort, that would be a handhold. But I would also say that this is where the need for multi-solving and intersectionality needs to happen, because then we need to be thinking about broadband. Like, how do we get broadband out to everyone so that, because it's not going to be possible for, talk about big government, to be the size that it needs to be to reach the folks who are in the farthest reaches isn't really feasible. But so what are the ways that we're going to be able to pave those pathways? I think we really need to think hard about that, about folks who are really in deep rural areas, who are some of the folks who are the most impacted in some ways, but who aren't as reachable. So that's the only other thing I would add to what Dr. Wright said.
Great. That's a helpful point, especially for the department. We're so far flung. Maite?
Great question, Laura. And I absolutely agree with Dr. Wright and Ms. Patterson with what's been said. And I think that at this time in where we are now, there's really no excuse anymore to not reach the hardest to reach communities. There are organizations like ours who have that reach. Ms. Patterson mentioned churches. She mentioned some great examples. We have those connections. We can help you. We want to help you. But in addition, so maintaining a strong relationship and good communications with our organizations can help you communicate with the communities that are the hardest to reach and publicize opportunities to comment and proactively invite our experience as well as you do so and insight. But other ideas also are making sure that there's translation services when needed, when requested. Understanding that audience, we can help you, and as you build that relationship, understand the audience. Think of the UN and how the UN addresses language, and this is what's needed in our country as it's changed over time. And it's not, government has this ability, and you can also have this ability. Extending comment periods is important as well, and expanding public notice across all forms of media and multiple languages. Speaking of languages, there is ethnic media. There is media in different cultures, different languages. That's very important to take into consideration. And then holding open public forums in communities who live near potential development, making sure that the message gets to them as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Now I see that Connie has magically appeared, which means that we are somehow and surprisingly out of time. I do want to give a special snap to Dr. Wright. I had not thought of FACA as sort of a convening way to maybe get at this. So that is definitely kind of a take home to do for us to see if we could figure out how to make that work for these really hard issues that we're not so great at tackling. I appreciate all of your time. I know I've said this to everybody, it's a lot to ask you to take a chunk out of your day to come and be with us. And we're very grateful, and we're gonna send your regards to Secretary Haaland.
Please, yes. We're very excited.
We are too.
We're very excited. Yes, we are. So thank you.
Well, thank you to our experts, and we'll be moving on to our next group, which will be our academic experts. And that will include Mark Squilici from the Raphael J. Moses Professor of Law, University of Colorado Law School, Getches Wilkinson Center, Dr. David Yaskowitz, Senior Executive Director from the Hart Research Institute for the Gulf of Mexico Studies at Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and Brian Prest, a fellow from the Resources for the Future. First up, we'll turn it over to Mark Squilici.
Hello, and thank you so much for organizing this important forum. A lot of important issues I think that we are able to discuss, and there have been some great ideas today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity both to hear from the other panelists and also to participate myself. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge something that Secretary Haaland mentioned at the beginning, which is just that we are probably going to be living with oil and gas development for the foreseeable future. But I think what she also recognized is that we need to be thinking about how we're going to ratchet down oil and gas development in light of climate change and the concerns that that has raised for us. And I think that really should be what informs the Interior Department as they are considering their policies. You know, if you think about what happened in the coal industry, it was quite predictable that coal was going to decline as rapidly as it did. And yet no one really took responsibility for trying to manage that decline in a kind of methodical and responsible way. And I think the same kind of writing is on the wall a bit for the oil and gas industry. We're seeing this big movement toward electrification that is likely to affect oil prices in particular going forward. And it's just important that we be thinking strategically about how to manage this decline in a way that I think is most responsible. I want to cover a lot of different topics today in my brief time. I'm already only at 3.5 minutes now, but let me just real briefly talk about rental fees, royalties, minimum bids, environmental protection, and bonding. And then I'm hoping at the end that Laura will ask the question that she's been asking most of the panelists that I'd like to take a crack at. So first, let me just talk about rentals. You know, we basically, as Nada pointed this out in the beginning, you know, we charge $2 for the 6 to 10 years, $1.50 for the first 5 years of a rental fee. And what that does really is encourage speculation. I think that's highly problematic to have rental fees that are so low. If we increase rental fees to something like $10 an acre, we would really, I think, see far less leasing going on, but the revenues would likely remain as high or maybe even higher than they are now. I don't think we'd need to even worry about distinguishing between competitive and non-competitive leases as long as we were charging a sufficient fee. And I would also say that what we ought to do is have an escalating rental fee. So it might be $10 for the first 3 years, but you'd ratchet that up over time, again, to discourage companies from holding on to leases that they're not likely to develop. If they don't develop them, at least more revenues would be coming into the government. I think that would be a way to sort of address some of the problems that we have right now with all of these stale leases on the public lands. Regarding royalties, I would just remind everybody about a 2017 GAO report on royalties. The GAO looked at 3 different royalty increase rates, 16.67%, 18.75, and 22.5. And their conclusion was that a modest, there would probably be a modest decline in the amount of leasing that happened with increased royalty rates, but that would be more than made up for in terms of revenues because of the higher kinds of royalty rates. And it seems to me that the BLM could easily justify a 20% royalty rate on federal lands. I know there are more complicated formulas. I think Brian may be talking about some of that in his talk, so I'll just leave that there. Regarding minimum bids, currently, you know, it's $2 an acre. I think you could easily increase that maybe to as much as $100 an acre for a minimum bid. Again, trying to discourage speculation would be the key here, and we wouldn't really have people who weren't interested in not developing their resources. On the environmental side, I'd really like to see much more proactive use of lease stipulations and conditions on APDs. Just a quick example, you're all familiar with the recent decision from the Wyoming District Court striking down the BLM methane capture rule, but I see no reason why the BLM couldn't impose a similar condition on a lease or on an APD. And that would be one way to sort of avoid the problem that the court created in that decision. I think it likely would be reversed, or at least it may very well be reversed on appeal, but this would be another strategy for addressing that problem. Finally, on bonding, it seems that the BLM is moving toward fixing its bonding problem. Again, a GAO report from 2019 recommended that the BLM increase its bonding amounts. Good idea. I hope you're going in that direction. It seems like you are. I just want to point out, though, again, the problems that we've had in the coal industry with respect to bonding. We have great provisions on bonding in the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. They have not always worked out as well as we had hoped, partly because of the bankruptcies and all these sort of dislocations that have occurred in the coal industry. And we could very well see something like that in the oil and gas industry as well. So I'm out of time. I just want to thank again the BLM and the Interior Department for hosting this forum. I look forward to answering some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. David Yaskowitz, the Senior Executive Director from Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies, Texas A&M, Corpus Christi.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today. I want to focus my comments today more on process and engagement. And I'd like to have that focus really be on the coastal and offshore areas primarily, but not exclusively, drawing on my experience in the Gulf of Mexico. As you have probably heard, the Gulf of Mexico is called United States Energy Coast. In fact, I can look out my window right now and see not only oil and gas platforms, the port of Corpus Christi, which might be called America's energy port, the service industries that support offshore operations, but also one of the largest installations of wind energy in the country, in addition to one of the most productive estuaries and the birdiest city in the country. Now, though it may sound like it, I'm not here on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce. I use this example to illustrate the complex integration that our environment and natural resources have with our coastal communities and economies. The ocean and Great Lakes economy contributed over $306 billion to the US economy and employed over 3.3 million people in 2017, as calculated by NOAA's Economics National Ocean Watch program. It's safe to say that at least 300,000 of those individuals work directly in the offshore energy industry, and most likely much more than that. However, these coastal communities where people live and work, such as myself, are on the front lines of the impacts from climate change, rising sea levels, more intensive storms, and in the case of Houston, Galveston metropolitan area, 500-year floods in the past 6 years. So is there a model or models for a path forward that considers the science of climate change, the impacts of policy and management decisions on the environment and economies and communities, and can show success of implementation? I think there's two relevant examples for that in what we're discussing here today. The first is the extremely successful Regional Ocean Partnership, the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, as an example. It was established in 2004 by the Gulf state governors in response to President Bush's Ocean Action Plan. It formed as a state-led effort and significant and important partnerships with the federal agencies, industry, environmental NGOs, and academic science community. The success of the alliance has stemmed from the willingness to work together to address the most pressing issues around community resilience, marine debris, wildlife, fisheries, habitat management, just to name a few of those issues. The Gulf of Mexico Alliance is not unique, though. There are other regional ocean partnerships, such as the Northeast Regional Ocean Council, Mid-Atlantic Council, and West Coast Alliance. These partnerships provide the opportunity to address these important issues, such as climate change and energy development, in a holistic manner that engages the broadest set of stakeholders immediately, built in, ready to go. My second example is the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. 100 nautical miles offshore from Galveston. From its beginnings, the exploration, establishment, and early success of the sanctuary happened because of the cooperation between the same type of stakeholders that made the Gulf Alliance and regional ocean partnerships so successful, with energy development and commercial fishing activities surrounding the sanctuary. It has flourished. Through its sanctuary advisory council, agencies, industry, environmental NGOs, and academia are at the table to do the heavy lifting of being partners for management of the sanctuary, but also expansion. In fact, the model proved itself successful again when the sanctuary was recently expanded to almost 3 times its previous size. All of this is to highlight the positive impact that a thoughtful, inclusive process with all stakeholders can result in lasting and meaningful solutions to our most pressing environmental, economic, and social issues. It's not easy, it's very challenging, it can be very messy, but the payoff is just not to sustain, but enhance the natural environment, our communities and economies is significant. In closing, I would encourage the Department of Interior and the larger federal family as it moves down the path to address climate change and the shared management of our environmental and natural resources to, 1, build even stronger relationships with the regional ocean partnerships and similar entities that can help chart and support a plan that is equitable, efficient, and will last. And 2nd, continue to invest, but at a greater rate, in understanding the complex and integrated nature of our coastal communities and our natural resources through the Environmental Studies program of BOEM as an example. Thank you.
So Brian Prest, I'm going to turn it over to you and ask the other folks to turn their cameras off for a second. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. How about that?
Thank you. Yes, actually. So thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today at the forum. I think it's really important. So my name is Brian Prest. I'm an economist and a fellow at Resources for the Future. RFF is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit research institution in Washington, D.C. And our mission is to improve environmental, energy, and natural resource decisions through impartial economic research and policy engagement. The institution is committed to being the most widely trusted source of research insights and policy solutions leading to a healthy environment and a thriving economy. I'll note that while RFF researchers are encouraged to offer their expertise to inform policy decisions, the views expressed here are my own and may differ from those of other RFF experts, its officers, or its directors. And RFF does not take positions on specific legislative proposals. Today, I'll provide an economist perspective on a specific element of Executive Order 14008. That is the adjustment of federal oil and gas royalties to, quote, account for corresponding climate costs, end quote. And so just to be clear, my remarks consider accounting for all climate costs, both upstream during production and downstream during fuel use, including combustion of fuels. So many of the existing rules for federal oil and gas leasing were established more than a century ago, well before the impacts of CO2 emissions were widely recognized as an important policy issue. To address that issue, economists overwhelmingly support policies such as economy-wide carbon pricing that places a fee on every ton of carbon emitted. And in fact, I'm happy to see today that this kind of policy was endorsed by API in their 5-point plan. In context of federal leasing, an analogous policy would be a carbon fee embedded in oil and gas leases, perhaps based on the social cost of carbon. So the idea is that this would account for and internalize climate externalities and thereby reduce emissions. This is not a new idea. In 2017, the Interior Scoping Report for coal leasing reform listed royalty increases or adders as a top option for achieving both a fair return and accounting for greenhouse gas emissions. The policy is also grounded firmly in more than a century of economics, going back to Pigou in 1924. Economics is very clear on this point. Maximizing economic efficiency requires externalities like pollution to be accounted for through a fee or comparable regulation. This is true even if the policy can only be applied to one subsector, such as federal lands, but not state or private. However, policies that increase the cost of operating on federal lands will result in some production shifting to state, private, and foreign producers. This is known as leakage, and it's a very real drawback of policies with limited coverage. As I already mentioned, an ideal policy would involve an economy-wide price, in which case international leakage could be addressed through a border tax adjustment along the lines developed by my RFF colleagues, Brian Flannery and Jan Mares. Still, leakage is not one for one, and economic efficiency requires a fee at an appropriate level. With leakage, the optimal fee is simply lower than it would otherwise be. The relative carbon intensity of fuels that replace federal production should also be taken into account in this adjustment. So the question is not whether there should be a fee, but what is the right level of the fee? A key economic principle underlying good policy is the need to balance benefits and costs. From an economic perspective, the climate benefits are the value of reduced emissions, typically measured by the social cost of carbon. Policies that have leakage merit a somewhat smaller, but nonetheless substantial fee reflecting climate impacts, because a ton of emissions reduced from covered sources, federal lands, translates to less than a ton reduced globally after accounting for offsetting increases in production elsewhere. While I focused on the climate impacts, there's another motivation for raising royalty rates, and that's the revenues they generate. In fact, the law explicitly states that the public should receive fair market value for resources extracted from public lands, and there's substantial evidence that current rates are below that level. Further, because half of royalties from onshore production are shared with the producing state, these revenues can help support state and local budgets during the energy transition. In a recent paper, my co-author James Stock and I calculated optimal carbon fees in various scenarios, accounting for that leakage. The different scenarios depend on what the policymaker's goal is, such as maximizing revenues or economic efficiency, depends on the value of the social cost of carbon, and depends on the chosen policy levers, such as royalty rates in terms of the percent, as is customary, versus fees in terms of dollars per ton of emissions. You can find all the detailed numbers in our paper, and I encourage you to take a closer look at these, since I just don't have sufficient time to share them with you right now. But you'll find that the results reveal that there are multiple, not just one, but multiple policy approaches that can be used to reduce emissions, some by tens of millions of tons of CO2 annually. At the same time, these measures can generate billions of dollars every year to support local communities. Any one of these approaches we evaluated could strike a balance between the two extremes of doing nothing and completely shutting down federal leasing. And this middle path of implementing carbon fees to reflect climate externalities can be an economically efficient approach to leasing reform, and I'd be pleased to continue to aid in assessing the merits of these different policy options. So thank you again for this opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Brian. And we will now have a 10-minute Q&A discussion with our panelists and interior leaders. So Mark and David, if you can turn your cameras back on. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so I want to acknowledge, just mindful and being respectful of folks' time, that we are behind. Nonetheless, we are determined to get a round of questions in with you. So we're going to go and do that, and appreciate your sticking with us if you can. So I first wanted to start by dating both myself and Mark and admitting that we both served together under Bruce Babbitt in the Interior Department a few years ago. So it's nice to be together on the screen. And I think, obviously, you've done just really deep thinking about land use in the West and greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas program. And I think as we're going through this comprehensive review, sharing any specific thoughts you have about how we should be looking at the NEPA review process in particular with regard to how we do our permitting. And if there's anything, you were quite specific in your presentation, but if there's any elaboration you wanted to provide on any of those points, with regard to execution, that would be welcome as well.
Sure. Thanks so much, Laura. And yes, nice to see you again. Let me sort of take the opportunity to address the issue that I kind of want to address, and I'm afraid I might not get a chance to. And it, I think, to some extent builds on what Brian was just talking about in terms of using sort of economic theory to try to capture external costs. There's a big problem, I think a much bigger problem than has been acknowledged with abandoned oil and gas wells. I think it was mentioned earlier. I think Wendy Kershoff threw out a 50,000 abandoned wells number. That I think is what's been reported. Forbes recently did a report suggesting there were 3 million abandoned wells in the United States. 2 million of them are unplugged. And it's a really serious climate problem because many of these wells are leaking methane and causing serious kinds of economic dislocations. And I just want to throw out this idea, which I think is important, which is essentially having the Interior Department working with EPA and other agencies and with the industry, and ultimately with Congress to maybe adopt something along the lines of the AML program under the Surface Mining Act, the Abandoned Mine Land Program. So there's a fee imposed, of course, on coal under the AML program. I did a sort of a back of the envelope calculation of this, and now we're talking, of course, all oil and gas, not just federal. You could impose a 1 penny tax on every barrel of oil produced and a penny tax on 1 million cubic feet of gas, and you would generate about $80 million a year. You know, so if you went up to 5 cents, you'd generate $400 million a year, and you're going to have to find some revenue stream to deal with this really overwhelming problem. It's a really serious problem. The good news is it creates lots of jobs. And it does sort of deal with the point Brian was making about capturing some of the external costs, and it's not just for the federal oil and gas, but oil and gas more broadly, which I think would be a good thing. So it's just sort of an, you know, a little out of the box idea, but I think it's really worth thinking about ways in which we can deal with this very serious problem. I was encouraged, frankly, by what API said today in terms of their interest in addressing climate change, and they hopefully could be an ally in setting up something like this. So that's what I wanted to sort of address. And I love to talk about NEPA at some other point, but let me turn it over to other panelists if I can.
Great. Amanda, you want to jump in?
I'd be happy to. Thanks everyone for your really thoughtful presentations. Professor Yaskowitz, first, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I would appreciate that. You know, I heard you talk a bit about regional collaboration and the value that that brings, and the importance of that. So I guess I wanted to ask you to clarify that a little bit more, to talk to us about, you know, how we can really lift up some additional collaboration, or really try and focus on that in the context of this review or otherwise, and how that could benefit our programs.
Right, and my most direct experience has been with the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, and of course the various components of DOI have been very much involved in the alliance, have supported it financially, the various priority issue areas, but have also added a lot to the management and science discussions that take place there. I think the benefit of the regional ocean partnerships is that you have a constituency and a stakeholder base already there, you know, that reaches into not only state and other federal agencies, but also, as I said, environmental NGOs, the academic science community, local, which I think is really important here, local government officials as well. And so as you move out, as DOI and the other federal family agencies move out on, you know, developing, you know, new rules and new policy, new management actions, engaging that community at the beginning and heavily is going to make the uptake of that much easier to go. And so I think that's the benefit, is that relationship is there, and to take advantage of those relationships.
Thank you, Professor. That's really helpful. Look forward to more discussion.
I'll ask a question to Mr. Prest. We did hear some convergence, as Professor Squillace noted, with our API representative saying they do support a price on carbon, and seemed to be some overlap with your ideas about a carbon adder on the royalty rate. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about how we might calculate that, and how, you know, if you think that there's a way to do that in a way that doesn't, if we're only addressing public lands, how does that work for keeping for supporting development on public land? We've heard some discussion about the cost of development on public lands as well. So how do we structure that in a way that might seem reasonable once we've got everyone at the table?
Yes, so that's a great question. Thank you. So it's something that my co-author, James Stock, and I have thought a lot about recently, in that economics says you need to have some type of price on carbon. If you can't do a price on carbon, you can approximate it by increasing the royalty rate, for example, in a way that's approximates it, something to a point where it's roughly commensurate. Or you could think about raising the royalty rate to the point that achieves a fair return measured by some benchmark, whether it's compared to state and private levels, or it's compared to, say, a revenue maximizing rate. And I don't want to get bogged down to technical details. I'd be happy to follow up on that, but we dig into this, into the math in detail in a recent paper. But there's multiple ways you can go about it. As I alluded to in my remarks, though, is if you're just focusing on federal lands, you are going to get this leakage problem, and that you're not going to get a one-for-one reduction because you're going to get production popping up on state and private lands, and also through imports. And so you need to account for that. And economic theory says that you should adjust you shouldn't charge a full, say, social cost of carbon. You should be charging something less. And that can help balance the benefits of production with the emissions reductions and also the revenues generated.
Thank you. Make that sound very straightforward. Much appreciated.
All right. Well, once again, we'd love to spend quite a bit more time talking about these issues. They I think, are and hoping to talk more and maybe even see some of your written comments to inform our comprehensive review. So I'm gonna try and wrap us up and not take too much time doing it, but thank you all again for taking time out of your day from various places in America that I can see that you're piping in from. That's sort of one of the only values out of what has happened with COVID is we've learned we can do things like this and bring in more people from more places. So I'm going to try and just do a quick summary of takeaways, which is going to be impossible to do. It's been a great conversation. And I really appreciate how many folks have offered to work with us and sort of be at the table, as Wendell put it, going forward. So really quickly, I mean, first of all, I wanted to say thanks to the Secretary. I know she's not here, but I know we all appreciated that she could take a few moments at the top to talk to us about these issues. And I just want to affirm that her team, we're listening, we're committed to being honest and transparent. We're excited to continue this dialogue. And the pause and the comprehensive review that we're undertaking is giving us the space to look at the federal fossil fuel programs, and they really haven't been meaningfully examined in decades, and that's important. Our Indigenous speakers, I think we heard certainly what we know, which is that the department must continue to work to meet our trust and treaty responsibilities and follow principles and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And we heard a lot about tribal consultation, which, as I said, we're sort of engaging in consultations on consultation right now. So it was really helpful to get a few more details there. And then noting that tribal energy resources are going to be important to meeting the energy needs for the nation, not just tribes. The industry experts noted that their production activity is becoming much more efficient. There are fewer impacts on the landscape, and noted certainly that energy production fosters American energy independence, economic success, jobs, support in communities. And I think we also heard loud and clear that the oil and gas industry is committed to being a part of the climate solution, including a new 5-point plan from the API, which we'll look forward to reading later. Our conservation experts talked about ways to sort of manage our increase in renewable energy and how we make sure that we do that in a way that really gets us exponentially moving forward. Talked about how pollution is really harming health and communities. It's harming the climate, and that the effects are disproportionately on disadvantaged communities, which I think we all know. And then again, just a reminder, clean energy is a growth economy, and we're certainly working towards that end here at Interior. Our labor experts were terrific and talked about the importance of being sure that we are focused on making sure that good paying jobs for Americans are a key part of what we are doing, onshore, offshore, renewable, fossil, and I think, shared value of supporting workers in our decision-making with family supporting and well-paying union jobs. Our equity experts talked again about the fact that oil and gas operations are often cited in communities that are poor, communities of color. And as a result, they're bearing disproportionate impacts on air and water. And they also talked about needing an EJ review of the federal oil and gas program, including suggesting that putting together a federal advisory committee might be an interesting and helpful and needed way to go about doing this in a bit of a rigorous fashion, and making sure that we get to some of these harder to reach communities. Last but not least, the academic experts. We had some detailed conversations about ways to make some improvements to the onshore oil and gas program. Good conversation about partnerships. There's a lot out there and we should always aim to be leaning into that. And then sort of almost an economic discussion about how do we, account for the externalities of climate change in terms of, pricing and other decisions that we might make, or recommendations we might make with regard to how we manage these programs. So inevitably that was imperfect, but I wanted to try and do a recap. I'm really grateful to hear all the different perspectives that people brought to the conversation today. I want to express appreciation again that folks took time out of their days to do this. We're busy. This is hard. The remote thing, although it allows us to come together, is also inevitably imperfect. So I know we're used to appearing like this, but and I'm just grateful it allowed us to bring so many people in to the conversation. So and thanks too to everyone who I know we had a listenership out there, and if you've stuck with us for all or part of it, we're really grateful. We hope you, like we have, watched and listened and thought about what folks were saying and what we were hearing. I feel like we got a lot of different perspectives and we have a lot to take in and think through as we go back to our day jobs. And last but not least, and certainly not least, I want to send a shout out to our amazing tech team. This was really, really flawless. There's so many people in the background and behind the scenes that made this flow and go well, including our heroic moderator, Connie Gillette. So thank you to everyone. They brought us together. This is a virtual success and an actual success. Final word. The written information opportunity, energy review at ios.doi.gov. Just a reminder, don't treat this as a public comment period. We're not in a formal proceeding here, but we really are interested in hearing, I think I said it before, your substantive and innovative thinking on all of these issues that we talked about today and improvements that we can make and things that we might not have thought about. So, consider an opportunity to provide us with some input and insights we might not otherwise hear. And just deep appreciation and thanks again to everyone for joining us today. I know it was a few hours together, but I certainly got a lot out of it, and I know our team here did. And we look forward to talking more about this really, really important set of issues that is just fundamental to, I'm going to go back to what Sharon Bacino said, the decisions that we make related to climate, related to these programs and to the work that we do, they're going to make all the difference for our kids and our grandkids. And that's really got to be our North Star in the work that we're doing. So thank you, everybody. Connie, are we good? Are we good to go?
Yes, we're good. I just wanted to mention that a recording of today's video will be made available on Interior's YouTube channel. And thank you, everyone, and please stay safe and take care.